Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. On the way to the office, Christopher decided to walk a couple of blocks. The road went through a park with a temple at the back of it. The man loved that place. And now, when there was a wonderful fall weather, it was especially peaceful. And Christopher really wanted to be alone, to think quietly, while he was not surrounded by numerous employees of the company. Not running in with papers and work messages. For several years now, his son has been ill. How many things had been done to get him back on his feet after that terrible accident? But all in vain. And for the last year, Stephen has been fading away in front of his eyes, and there is no hope for recovery. That's what the doctors say. And his granddaughter is also missing. The whole world has been looking for her. Christopher himself involved all his connections when the help of the police could not be hoped for, but Camille disappeared without a trace. Ah, if her granddaughter were alive, close by, never disappeared, Stephen would be relieved. Maybe he'd even have a reason to live, and he would have recovered. All these heavy thoughts tormented Christopher for a long time. It was excruciatingly hard for him to watch his son die. Stephen could hardly even recognize his father anymore. In the rare moments when he regained consciousness, he constantly calls for his daughter. He loved her so much. Where did Camille disappear to? Her body was never found, never ransomed. Disappeared as if she never existed. Christopher didn't notice as he approached the temple. He often came here to ask the Lord God for help, to ask for his son to get better, and for his granddaughter to be found. There were beggars standing at the gate of the temple. Beggars are normal for such places not to serve. If you are asking for something for yourself, if it's a sin to sympathize with someone else's grief. And Christopher served. His eyes fell on a child. A ragged, dirty little girl stood beside a babushka in a shawl. Her head was busy on some rag, and her coat was quite out of height, written off almost to the ground. He looked at her carefully. What a fate for a child, the man thought. Suddenly, a crazy idea came into his head. What if he brought this little girl to Stephen, who looked almost as old as Camille would be now? Uncle, give me some money, for God's sake. I see you are a kind uncle. The girl finished in a thin voice. What do you need the money for? I decided to make conversation with the child. Christopher, I will buy a bun and bread, replied the girl. I can buy you lots of buns. And man, get out of here. Unless you want to give the child money. Suddenly rudely cut off his conversation with the child. Grandma, and from the looks of it, seemed so godly and humble. Christopher, not paying attention to the old woman, extended his hand to the girl. Come with me, he said, and she trustingly moved towards him. The old woman blocked the way. But at that moment, two guards Christopher grew in front of her, whose unnoticeable shadow always followed him. Don't be afraid, little girl, let's go. The girl did not dare, gave her hand to the man, and he turned to the guards, give the dough money. Christopher put the child in the car and drove away. The grandmother, holding a bundle of large bills in her hands, looked perplexedly after. Emily woke up with a sharp pain in her lower abdomen. It was still dark outside the window. It had begun, she realized. There was nothing left for her to do. To wake up her husband sleeping next to her. Stephen, get up. I think we have to go to the hospital. She called out to her husband. The man did not immediately realize what was wrong. He sat up on the bed and for a few seconds came to his senses from his yodephone. He was brought out by Emily's moaning. Stephen, I think it has begun. What still did not understand the husband, but seeing squirming in pain, his wife jumped up, fussing for pants and a shirt. He helped dress his wife. She was squirming in pain and moaning. Now, dear, don't worry, Stephen soothed her, almost panicking himself. We'll go now, and everything will be fine. He helped Emily down the stairs and took her out to the yard. They hadn't put the car in the garage in a month, knowing that labor could start at any time, and there was no point in calling an ambulance, which wouldn't get out of town anytime soon. So Stephen's car was already at the ready. The man sat his wife in the back seat, Put the key in the ignition. Emily moaned faster. I'm in a lot of pain. Be patient, dear. We'll get there quickly. There were no traffic jams on the roads at night, so Stephen's car sped along the highway at high speed. At the hospital, the woman was placed on a gurney and taken to the maternity ward. Stephen pulled into the driveway. You can't go in there. A stern nurse blocked the way. Wait here or go home. Your wife will call you when she gives birth. But Stephen couldn't leave Emily alone. He seemed to feel a pain in his stomach at that moment, as if it was he who was giving birth and not his spouse. He sat down with his arms around his head. Wait, how long? What if something goes wrong? No, everything will be fine. There's nothing the doctors can do. Emily. It was very important for Stephen to be the first to know of the miraculous event, the birth of his firstborn. He's not going anywhere. He would wait here as long as he needed to. With these thoughts, he plunged into the subject. The rash memory drew images of their introduction to Emily wedding. The feeling of endless happiness, and imagination gave out pictures of him holding a baby in his arms, feeling like the happiest father. Ah, how happy he is that fate has brought him together with the most wonderful girl on earth. And let her not their circle. Let she grow up not in a luxurious mansion, but in an ordinary communal apartment. She is still the most wonderful, tender, and beautiful. They met a year ago at an event. The spectacular girl attracted Stephen's attention, and he resolutely went to her to get acquainted. But the road was blocked by an ambo with a smooth, shaved head. It turned out that the searing brunette accompanied some authoritative man from the circle of businessmen. But Stephen isn't one to give up easily. He's a fighter by nature. And this girl is bound to take notice of him. And she did. On her way to the ladies' room, Stephen blocked her way, and she smiled. She noticed him too. You might be in trouble, she said, smiling. Trouble? My companion might not like it. Why are you so insistent on giving me a stare? Do I drink? Stephen smiled. The girl thoughtfully considered him young, about 30 years old, quite handsome. No ring on his finger, dressed expensively. I don't think you're very comfortable in this atmosphere, among the admitted stiffs, Stephen suggested. You guessed it. I want to get away from here to some quiet place where I don't have to pretend to be someone else, but be myself. So what is it? Let's avoid it. Stephen held out his hand to her. How do you like my company? My name is Stephen, by the way. Emily, the girl extended her hand in return. But it's not easy to escape from here. There are guards everywhere. I know a loophole. The man moved slightly closer to her, and she smelled the scent of expensive perfume. Come on, come on. They slipped quietly through the back rooms, past the kitchen, and out of the grounds. The quiet place was a dock on the shore of the lake. Swans swam in it, ducks near the shore, and reeds. Over the conversations, they did not notice how the sun disappeared behind the horizon. But Stephen didn't want to part with his new acquaintance. It's late. I have to go, she said quietly, looking into his eyes. Stay with me, he asked, not taking his eyes off her. It didn't bother him at all that the new acquaintance was from Nice, that she accompanied rich men, perhaps even slept with them. He himself was heir to a decent fortune and could give her a lot of gifts, even if not the whole world, but a part of it. And at this moment he wanted to make her happy. There was something in her gaze that spoke of how bored she was with a torturous event where she was only an ornament. And he brought her to his house. You have a very beautiful house, Emily remarked. It's my father's house, but someday it will be mine. Who's your father? Oh, I'm sorry, this is probably embarrassing. Why not? It's no secret. My father is the co-owner of a construction business, a very busy man and not at all poor, as you can see. Have a drink. Perhaps, the girl replied. It was late at night. It was their first night that had driven Stephen crazy. In the morning, he found Emily gone and a note with a phone number on the table. On the one hand, he was upset. He didn't want to let her go. On the other hand, there was hope in his soul that she was ready to meet him again. He had fallen in love like a boy, And it didn't matter what his father said about his beloved. It didn't matter what their acquaintances thought. All that matters is that he's met the most beautiful girl. He would be with her. A week later at breakfast, Stephen told his father he wanted him to meet his girlfriend. "Who is she?" asked Christopher. "Tell me, son, what family? What does she do? Is she studying abroad, or does she have a salon? Is there a woman's business here? What does it matter who she is?" "Dad?" Stephen was outraged. "She's just the most beautiful girl, and I love her." The father looked at his son carefully. "Are you sure?" "Of course I am. Otherwise I wouldn't have introduced you to her." "All right. Well, let's see. Bring her over to meet her." Stephen was the only son of a businessman. Christopher had given him a good education, had given him a share in the business. But his plan was to marry his son to a girl from a good family, maybe even to one of the daughters of his friends and partners. That evening, when Stephen and Emily entered the living room, Christopher looked at the girl carefully. Almost no makeup. Hair pulled back in a bundle at the back of her head. A simple dress. That she was great and might well have carried off her son was undeniable. But the face said Limita from the Urals. She turned out to be modest, but simple-minded, and her appearance certainly did not fit in the interiors of a luxurious house. Christopher for a minute imagined that she would settle here and would be annoying to see a servant with the rights of a mistress. "But what do you do?" asked Stephen's father as they settled around the large table. "It's beautiful, the server, the crystal, and the plates." "Dad, stop interrogating Emily. What's this about?" Trying to stop Stephen's father. "What did I ask?" "I wondered what the young ladies were doing today." Christopher smiled strangely. "I want to go to college. I'm preparing," replied the girl, modestly lowering her eyes. "How interesting. And in which one?" "To be honest, I haven't decided yet. In the search." The girl twirled her fork in her hand, hesitating to start eating. In the search, Christopher thought about finding a rich husband, not a university. He increasingly disliked his son's choice. Emily, on the other hand, wanted to get away from Stephen's father as soon as possible and be alone with him. She liked the pretty orchard house very much. And in general, Stephen could become her springboard, if not to high society, then at least a luxurious, well-fed life. She wouldn't have to accompany the bigwigs. She wouldn't have to endure their paws on her body. After dinner, Stephen took Emily home. When he returned, he found his father on the terrace with a glass of whiskey. "I'm not going to ask your opinion, Dad, about the crisis," he said to Christopher. "I can see you don't like her." "It's not that I don't like her," Father replied. "It's just that she's not our type." "Tell me, who are her parents? Where is she from? She doesn't even have an education. I'm not talking about the fact that she didn't go to a good school like the children of everyone we know. She didn't go to any school at all. Another question is, did she graduate from high school? What does it matter?" Stephen was indignant. What does it matter? The father started to lose his temper. Such as, did she foresee a rich boy? She decided to mothball him, become the wife of a promising businessman, and live happily ever after. Emily is not that kind of girl. Just imagine how you'll live with her. She's gonna make you borscht. You're ready to live in a 2-bedroom in the suburbs. You can be sure I won't let her into our house. So I'll live in a 2-bedroom. And I'm capable of earning a decent place to live. I'm not a boy anymore. And don't tell me who to love. Who to love? What do you know about love? Here's your mom was wonderful, kind, intelligent, educated. But you think we married her for love? You're wrong, son. We got married because our marriage was promising for a future life of promise. Here our parents were people of foresight and realized that with such a wife is not ashamed to go out in society, that she will be a reliable rear and never embarrass me. And this is your Emily. She doesn't even know how to behave at the table. That's why she didn't eat anything. All she drank was water. I don't want to talk to you anymore, my father told Stephen. He walked out, realizing that it was pointless to continue the conversation. He was in love with Emily, wanted her to be there for him, so they could have children and raise and educate their boy and girl together. No, better 2 boys and 2 girls. And the father would gradually get used to his girl. Stephen was sure of this. Emily was indeed born and lived in the Urals in a small town where the only enterprise was a concrete factory. Since her childhood, there were only noisy communal neighbors around her. Their children, who hurt the girl and did not want to play with her. Poverty and hopelessness. Emily's parents occupied one of the rooms. Father and mother worked at the factory, where wages were constantly delayed. In the house sometimes there were no sweets, and the girl dreamed of candy. The father and mother drank in a drunken frenzy. The husband chased his wife down the long corridor, shouting like, "I'll kill her. Where are you, bitch?" One day, Emily came home from school, and from the doorstep, she heard her parents drunkenly cursing. "Give me the bottle, you bitch," shouted the father. "I'll kill you now. You've been drinking it since this morning," objected already drunken voice mother. The girl quietly went to the kitchen, where the neighbor Aunt Katia cooked borscht. It smelled very good and her stomach clenched. "Emily, you're back," roared the neighbor, "and yours is again doing since the morning. You've been hungry. Baby, sit down. I'm feeding you soup." The neighbor was a pensioner, so she was almost always at home. She often fed Emily, knowing that her parents may not feed the girl for a week, caring only about how to Oda Verichet wine vodka store. The father's drunken rage often made the mother cry. And then the neighbors called the police, and the district police stopped coming to them, knowing that nothing can be done with this family. My father was taken to the police station, then released. When he returned home, he would start yelling from the doorstep to get a drink. And if his mother wouldn't give him a bottle, he'd hit her again. And so on, and so forth. That's the hell Emily lived in. When she turned 16, she knew for sure that she would leave this poverty, tucked with a blanket on her bed behind a closet, dividing the room into adult and child halves. She dreamed of driving a beautiful car, living in a luxurious house, and her husband giving her flowers and expensive perfume every day. And there would be no drunken parents around. She will definitely forget about them as a terrible dream. She stole money for a ticket to the Capitol from her neighbor, the very one who fed her when her drunken parents forgot about their daughter. She ran to the train station, trying not to look back, but breathed. And she calmed down, only when she got on the train. Now she will definitely not catch up and will not return to a dirty communal room with cockroaches and screaming uneasy drinking from wine, father and mother. Now she will have a new, beautiful and bright life. To the sound of the wheels, she imagined how on the platform she would be met by Prince Charming and taken away to meet him, to her Emily's delight. However, the dreams began to crumble. Just then, there was no prince on the platform. Where to go? The girl didn't know. The city was not familiar to her. Now she did not rush in a convertible to meet happiness, but silently wandered through unfamiliar streets, with each block losing optimism. "How much is a pie?" asked Emily. At the street vendor meat table with cabbage and potatoes, 50 go. "What prices?" thought the girl. "Give me with cabbage, please, and tea," and another 40 did not ceremonize the peddler. Sighing, Emily counted the change in her purse and gave the right amount. She sat down on the bench, and the teenager's tree and thoughtfully survived. What to do next? She didn't know. Where to go? A girl in a strange city with no money. Back to the station and home. But no, it's better to sleep on the bench. The girl didn't notice the woman sitting next to her. "What are you dreaming of, pretty girl?" she asked Emily. The girl looked at the stranger beautiful clothes, bright makeup and hairstyle, talked about the fact that she was certainly not a stranger and did not need nothing. "Is that so?" "I know. I don't know where to go. You don't have a place to sleep. It's really getting dark outside." It was getting dark. Emily suddenly felt like crying. Would she have to sleep on a bench now? The stranger with the beautiful makeup kept asking. "Yes," Emily sighed. "Well, let's get acquainted. My name is Evelyn." "Emily, come with me. I'll help you. I came to the Capitol to find happiness, And what did you find? What did you find? The woman was surprised. Happiness. The woman laughed. Well, you know, everyone has his own understanding of happiness. For me, for example, it's enough that I have a house, a job, money, and I live in my own pleasure, not passion, like Papa Carlo. I can teach you too. You can, of course. It's not difficult. Come with me. The girl needs a place to sleep anyway. Evelyn took Emily to an apartment where 6 other girls lived. They were different, but not like her, confident and beautiful. Meet Emily, girls. She's your new friend now. The girls were friendly, but Emily found them a little strange. However, she was so tired today that she fell asleep as soon as her head touched the pillow. In the 2 years she had been working for Evelyn, she had learned a lot. How to be inconspicuous, and on the contrary, spectacular when needed. Now Emily was no longer that naive girl who came to the capital for happiness. Are they all unmarried? On one of the first days of her stay in the apartment, she asked Nastya's plump lips. Oh, still is married, laughed a new friend. Why do they need us if they have wives? Emily did not understand. Oh dear, their wives are such mamas and thems, that to go out with them in the light pusateki cannot afford their wives for home, and for children, not for social gatherings. Married men were not part of Emily's plans, but when she met Stephen, she knew she had to take him. This one's available. He took her to a luxurious house and seemed to fall in love at first sight. Plus, he wasn't obnoxious. He was very handsome. Maybe that's the way to go. Luckily, Dad might be an obstacle though, but she'd figure something out. Not a month later, Stephen proposed to her, and she naturally said yes. The guy was overjoyed. He didn't care that his lover was an escort, and Emily did everything to fall more and more in love with him every day. On the appointed day, the marriage registration took place. Their wedding was a lavish affair. Stephen's father did his best not to fall foul of his surroundings. Stephen brought Emily to the bridal salon and said, pick any dress you want. You know, whatever the bride needs. Choose the best and don't think about money. She wasn't going to think about money. Soon, she would forget about thinking about how much money was in her purse at all. So she chose a dress, not based on style and fashion, but the most expensive one. The diamond ring was already shining on her finger, and to it was added a gift from Stephen for the wedding. Beautiful earrings with the same gemstones. Emily was no longer surprised at the way guests behaved at weddings or social events. It wasn't in her Ural town, where people would throw a raucous party, drunk to the brim with vodka, and tore up 2 accordions. Here everything is dignified. No one dances or sings vulgar ditties. Everyone walks slowly through the hall with a glass of wine in his hand, nods to each other, strained, smiling, and even do not kiss when they meet, but only lightly touch cheeks. But what does she care? She's already the wife of a businessman whose daddy is rich. Now she will be a mistress in a luxurious house with servants. If only her alcoholic parents could see what their daughter has become. So Emily became the lawful wife of a wealthy young and quite handsome man. A life-changing experience. We are bound to have a baby almost from the first days of our life together. Stephen began to say, let's have a baby. And that's exactly what Emily didn't plan to do. What birth? She had not yet had time to enjoy a luxurious life. But Stephen insisted, and she kept taking birth control pills. When her husband accidentally discovered a vial of medication in her dressing table drawer, there was an uproar. I thought you said you weren't on birth control. You've been lying to me this whole time. You said you didn't know why we couldn't conceive. Emily had nothing to say, so she started crying. Honey, let's just live a little for ourselves. You think having a baby is gonna interfere with our happiness? That's crazy. Babies are the real happiness. But there's the diapers, the positioning, the constant crying in the house. And children often get sick. Emily persisted, hoping to dissuade her husband from the idea of having a baby. Emily, there are nannies for that. But my figure will be ruined after childbirth. And do you love me? Emily resorted to a well-known feminine trick. She burst into tears. Stephen looked carefully at his young wife. "My fool, I never love you, only for a son or a daughter." Emily realized that there was no way out of the situation, and her husband was adamant in his decision. A month and a half later, she realized she was pregnant. The prospect of becoming a mother did not please her at all, but Stephen cried when he heard the news. At first he was confused, but then he picked Emily up and carried her, twirling her around the room in his arms. "Daddy, wake up." Stephen was shaken by someone's shoulder. When he opened his eyes, he saw a nurse standing in front of him. "You have a daughter, 5'6", weighing 3,200. Congratulations, Daddy." Daughters are a special joy for a father. Overjoyed, Stephen even forgot to ask how his wife is doing. "Why don't you ask how Mommy is?" "Oh yes, how's Emily? How is she feeling?" "All is well with your wife. Tomorrow you can visit her and meet your daughter. In the meantime, go home and get ready to meet your newborn." At home, Stephen and her father raised a glass of wine to the birth of their heiress. "I'm glad to be a grandfather," said Christopher, "but you must give me a grandchild too." "Of course, Dad, there will be many children in our family. And there will always be children's laughter in the house." We'll see," Christopher said thoughtfully. "Don't doubt it, Father. What will you name your daughter? Is there any doubt?" "Camille, of course. Do you hear how Camille Sterhapovna sounds? As the song goes, the name Stephen means winner. So our girl will be a double winner. All roads will be open to her. She'll have no barriers." "That's a great name, son." Christopher almost wept. A few days later, there was a new resident, a new member of the family. A cozy bedroom was prepared for her. Stephen hired a live-in nanny as he had promised his wife. The baby was surprisingly calm. The young father spent almost all his time with her, walked in the garden with the stroller, walked bent over the crib. He even fed her from a bottle himself. Emily immediately refused to breastfeed. Sometimes Stephen thought that his wife was indifferent to their daughter. And then Emily had to pretend to be a caring mother. She clearly understood what Camille meant to her husband. Camille's first birthday was celebrated in grand style. The garden was drowned in balloons. The guests were the same partners of Christopher. They came with boxes, beautifully decorated with bows, carrying gifts and congratulating Stephen on the momentous occasion. Emily watched from the balcony, having no desire to go downstairs and pay with people who were completely unfamiliar and uninteresting to her. But Stephen was completely immersed in the atmosphere of the party. "And who is it that came to us?" he said to his daughter. "Look what clowns have come to visit you." Camille laughed, dressed in a beautiful pink dress. She was a princess, and everyone was running around her, playing with her and lifting her in their arms and tossing her up. Stephen seemed not to notice that Emily was not present among the celebrants. She still paid little attention to her daughter, and he was happy that his little girl had turned 1 year old. Emily was melting under the strong hands of the monsieur. She had known Robert for a long time, since the time she had been working as an escort, where he worked in an elite salon, serving only VIP clients, and he did not engage in lovemaking with clients. Robert belonged to those who are called persons with non-traditional sexual orientation. Therefore, girls trusted him even the most intimate secrets, which sometimes you cannot tell a friend. "But how is your husband?" asked Robert. "Beautiful, well-groomed body, Emily." "Better not to ask," sighed Emily. "Bored to death all the time with his daughter. She's a real sweetheart. It's like he doesn't even notice me. And you yourself to him to show attention, to be affectionate, be affectionate. I know the type. They quickly find replacements for bored wives with a slight accent of mountaineer," advised the monsieur. Emily hesitated. She didn't want to say goodbye to the luxury she had grown accustomed to. But it was also unbearable to be in a confined space. She and Stephen hardly ever went out. They rarely went out to restaurants, and foreign trips to the sea could not even talk about. All her attempts to persuade Stephen to go to a resort were met with the same answers. What about Camille? We can't leave her with a nanny for too long. She's just a baby. Don't you understand that? The only thing Emily could accomplish was a trip to the salon. I have to keep in shape, honey, she used to say. Otherwise, I'll be decrepit and ugly, like all the wives of your business partners. And do you love me? Stephen agreed, and now Emily legally devoted 3 days a week to her beloved. Spa manicure, pedicure, tanning, massage. On these days, the girl took the car and went on her own business. Once in a while she could afford to go shopping, but most often her husband would say, "Why do you need to go somewhere? It takes time, and you have to leave your daughter behind. You can order everything from a catalog." This is not how Emily imagined her new luxurious life. Her plans included trips to the resort, shopping in Europe, carefree vacation in the most prestigious places, bars, restaurants, nightclubs. But family life with the son of a rich man was not like that. Emily constantly needed to be at home, to pay attention to Camille and to run errands for the servants. And she wanted to have fun. "Listen, Robert, how are our girls doing?" she suddenly asked. "They're doing fine, not complaining. Jenna just got back from the Greek islands. A client took her there. A very distinguished man. Jenna is so happy. She came back all rested and wearing all her new tchotchkes. Emily was so jealous. Jenna's better than her. Emily's worse. But relax. You're intense," Robert said. "Hey, is there anyone you're interested in, you know?" "Yeah, I'm really sour on this life. I just want to have fun, relax." "How are you gonna leave home? You've got a husband. Won't he like what you've done? Won't he find out?" said Emily, thinking through a plan of action for fun and entertainment. Robert continued to massage the girl's body for several minutes. Silence hung in the room. Then the masher said, "I can't recommend anyone from ours. He quickly figured you out here. Why set yourself up? But I have one Italian in mind. He's very rich." Emily raised her head. "Tell me who he is, where he goes, what attracts him." "At Gidel's restaurant on Fridays." Emily hesitated. Friday was not her day. She's usually out of the house on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturdays. "Is he really that rich?" she asked the masseur. "Very rich. He has vineyards in Italy and wineries. Makes wine, sells it all over the world." "Married?" "No." "What are you? A bachelor?" "What is he? An old man or a freak?" "What's that?" The girl was puzzled. "A handsome man," said Robert, with his lips. "Maybe he's not interested in girls then." Robert laughed. "How would I know? Is he or isn't he?" "Emily." I was curious. Who was this handsome man? On the way home, she wondered how to get out of town next Friday. When she pulled into the yard, little Camille and her nanny were playing in the garden. "Stephen where?" she asked, without even saying hello. "Stephen is at home," answered the nanny. Her husband was working on some papers in the study. "Are you back already, sweetheart?" he asked when he saw his wife enter. "Yes, you see, the salon has changed the schedule. Now, instead of Thursday, my day will be Friday," answered Emily. "But honey, we're having a family dinner Friday night. Have you forgotten? That's completely impossible, darling." Emily hugged her husband and kissed so he forgot both the salon schedule and the dinner. He loved his wife too much to refuse her, so passionate, so young and beautiful. The tumultuous sex bore fruit. Emily had received the coveted authorization. On Friday, Emily entered the lounge of the Agudel restaurant, where she had been more than once. She spotted the Italian almost immediately and settled down at a table. On the contrary, the hall was peaceful. Quiet music was playing. Emily did not have to strain much to attract the attention of the foreigner. He gestured to the waiter, and in a minute there was a bottle of expensive wine on the girl's table. "This is for you from that gentleman," said in a low voice. Waiter Emily smiled sweetly and invitingly at the Italian, as if not objecting to him to sit down to her. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Mario." Emily extended her hand to the foreigner. The girl always called herself that when meeting men for the first time, Or when she wanted to make an impression, "Are you bored here?" "No, I just came for a cup of coffee. But since we've met, may I offer you a glass of this fine wine?" Emily smiled again. Their conversation was ordinary at first glance, but Emily saw how the Italian's eyes were burning. He already wanted her, and she was anticipating. A total gamble, an adventure. A phone call distracted Stephen from his work. It was his friend John calling. After Stephen got married, they had seen less of each other, and John often reproached his friend for this. "Buddy, tell me, what is your precious wife doing in a restaurant with some foreigner?" asked a friend. "You are wrong, friend." Emily went to the salon. "No, you're wrong. I'm sitting across the street, and I can perfectly see this guy drooling on your wife." "John, I don't like you talking about Emily like that." Stephen was outraged. "And you check out what I'm seeing. You won't like it anymore. Bye, buddy." The phone beeped. Stephen experienced an unparalleled feeling of jealousy. He was tormented by doubts, and he hurried downstairs to get into the car and see for himself if his friend was right. With John, they had been friends since childhood, and he could not have done such a treacherous thing to him. He certainly couldn't. His imagination painted all sorts of pictures. Here is Emily in the arms of another man. Here he is stroking her, caressing her, and she is writhing with desire. Stephen pressed down on the gas pedal even harder. The last thing he saw was a truck speeding toward him. Before he could react, Stephen swerved into the oncoming lane. The squeal of the tires came from far away. The driver of the truck hit the left column hard and struggled to get out of the car. He tried to pull the man out of the foreign car. He did not manage to pull the victim to the roadside immediately. The bloody driver, as if in a fog, found a phone and called an ambulance. "Hello, Emily." The girl heard her father-in-law's voice in the receiver. "Stephen had an accident. Urgently come to the hospital." It seems that her romantic acquaintance ended this way, almost without beginning. "I'm sorry, Mario," she told the Italian, "but I have to leave urgently. But can I hope to see you again?" "Anything is possible." Emily smiled and headed for the exit. At the hospital in the corridor, she saw an agitated Christopher. He was nervous, out of breath, and mumbling. A nurse handed Emily a robe. "What's wrong?" Emily asked her father-in-law. "I don't understand anything yet. They said there was an accident on the highway. A collision with a truck. They're operating on him right now." "Emily, do you have any idea where he was going?" That's when John showed up in the hallway. He was as excited as Christopher. As he asked the man, "While they are operating," answered Emily's father-in-law. "Emily, you didn't answer my question. Maybe he had some kind of urgent meeting." "With whom?" "I don't know," answered the girl. "I was at the salon at the time. I left at lunchtime." Christopher, without stopping, walked down the corridor with his hands on his head. John went to the wall. "I know everything, bitch. It's because of you. Stephen, now it's out there. And it's not clear whether he's going to live or not. If he doesn't die, maybe he'll be crippled." "What did you pretend you didn't know what Emily's man was talking about?" "I know that you were in the restaurant dating a foreigner." John hissed. "You've been cheating on my friend for a long time. Bitch, I was always against him marrying you. You're a roadside bitch. You don't deserve him. Leave me alone and don't make up things that didn't happen." Emily was afraid that the confusion would be caught and the perpetrator would give her away at the scene. A doctor came out of the operating room. All three rushed to him, hoping for good news. "We operated on him. The damage and the wound are very complex. He's now in intensive care. Doctor, may I see him?" With hope in your voice, Christopher asked. "Not yet. He's in serious condition and it's unstable. So please go home and we'll let you know if anything changes for better or worse." All three of them headed for the exit. Emily caught John's hateful gaze. Christopher was as if in a stupor, didn't notice anything at all. John offered him a ride. "You shouldn't be driving like that. I'll drive you home. You'll be fine." "Let's hope for the best." He put the man in the car, and he himself walked over to Emily, praying to God that he would survive. Otherwise, I'll tell everyone where he was flying at that speed. He turned and walked towards the car. Emily watched him silently. The atmosphere at home was unbearably tense. Almost no one spoke. Even little Camille hardly made any noise or laughed, as if she sensed that her father was on the verge of death. Doctors fought for his life for another month. Stephen's condition was unstable. After a month, he was transferred to the intensive care unit, and his relatives were given permission to visit him. The hospital room was peaceful with beeps, gauges, and flickering lights. Stephen lay under a sheet with his eyes closed. Christopher and Emily quietly entered the room. "Hello, son," quietly said Stephen's father. At the voice of his father, the man opened his eyes blurred. His gaze fell on Emily, and a faint semblance of a smile appeared on his face. However, he could not utter a word. Just watching Emily, she realized he recognized her. For some reason, it was at that very moment that she felt a strong sense of guilt. If Stephen was really going to the restaurant where she was with Mario, how did he know that? Had he set up surveillance on his wife? That didn't sound like her husband at all. He loved her and kind of trusted her and wouldn't let her go. But he just wanted her to be there for him and his daughter. He wanted her to turn into a normal domestic woman for whom family is everything. And she's not like that. She deserves better. Except that only Stephen could give her the best. And Emily understood that. Her husband was stability. And right now, that's in jeopardy. What would happen to her if Stephen didn't survive? If he had another crisis? With these thoughts, she looked at her husband, who could not speak, move, react, or do anything at all. He just lay there and watched. One day, the attending physician, Stephen, asked Emily and Christopher to come in. In the office, he invited them to sit down. "This is not going to be an easy conversation. You see, your son and your husband have severe brain changes, so no matter what we do, we can't cure him and get him back on his feet." "But how can that be, Christopher? He got better, and he's alive after all." "Yes, he's alive. His speech function is impaired. His motor system is not functioning. And over time, his internal organs may begin to fail. Your son will slowly die before your eyes." "Christopher, he's up. Tell me, is there nothing that can be done? Any money, any clinic? That's what I want to talk to you about. Is there a very good clinic in Europe where your son could probably be treated? It's expensive, but I've been on the phone with them. They have a very good track record of treating these patients. We can send Stephen there." "So what's the holdup?" Christopher's getting excited. "Wait a minute. Stephen's wife should go with him." The doctor interrupted the man. "Why is that?" I asked Emily indignantly. It was not in her plans to be with her sick husband, depriving herself of all pleasures. "I'll explain now," began the doctor. "You see, we have recorded an improvement in all the indicators of Stephen's condition when you are near him. Such cases are described in the medical literature and are not very common. But I won't torture you with scientific terms and the nature and origin of this phenomenon. You just have to understand. Next to you, Stephen is recovering. It's decided, Emily. You're going to Europe with my son. It's out of the question. Can you do the paperwork? Send me the invoice." Emily stood dumbfounded, watching how cleverly her father-in-law was sending her and her ailing husband to Europe. Stephen and Emily spent exactly 2 years in a European clinic. That's how long it took to rehabilitate, constantly being close to her husband. Emily, to her own surprise, began to notice that Stephen's progress pleased her. They became closer than they had ever been. They talked and laughed a lot. The treatment in the European clinic really benefited Stephen. Not all functions have recovered yet, but he could already speak normally. The man missed home very much and often talked to his daughter about how good it would be when they returned. "How much I missed my daughter," Stephen said one day, looking at a picture of Camille. He often took the picture in his hands and stroked the image of his daughter's hair, her face, as if she were close by. "You'll see her very soon. She's very big now. 3 years old, Emily laughed. When it was time to go home, the doctor told the girl almost the same thing as the attending physician in Russia. You are very good for your husband's health. Understand, this disease is not treated in Russia. At least I do not know such cases. We've done everything in our power. Now it's up to you. You need to stay close to your husband. Any deterioration in his condition is devastating. He will just slowly die and melt before your eyes, as the Russians say. We were told that in Russia too, Emily replied. Really, I don't understand how it can be. The doctor spread his hands and wished them a happy journey. Husband and wife went home. The house was being prepared for Emily and Stephen's arrival. Christopher was playing with Camille, always saying, "Soon our daddy will be here." And the girl did not understand how, but repeated, "Papa, Papa." When the long-awaited travelers arrived, the little girl said the word again. And Stephen had so many emotions. He wanted so much to pick up his daughter in his arms, to make friends with her. But the man's legs still did not move, and he moved in a wheelchair. Still, joy overflowed his heart. "This is my Queen Camille, my daughter, my joy, my happiness all the time," he repeated. The whole family gathered around a large table to celebrate Stephen's return. "We have prepared a room for you on the first floor, converted from the guest room," Christopher said, addressing his son. "That way you'll be more comfortable going out on your own from the kitchen to the living room." And they built a ramp on the porch. "But you've already seen it." "Thanks, Dad," Stephen smiled. Life got back to normal. Every morning a nurse and a doctor from the Filth Academy came to see Stephen. A special bed with a comfortable mattress was installed in his room for physical therapy. Therefore, if you had to lie for a long time back, the man did not get tired. A nurse took him out for dinner. He was always present at the common table with other family members, his wife, daughter, and father. Camille would often come into Daddy's room with a book or some toy. "Look at the doll my grandfather bought me." One day my daughter said, "She's beautiful, but she has legs that don't bend like yours." "Look." Stephen looked at his daughter with sad eyes. "How I want to run around the garden with her, play ball, build a doll's house with her. My legs will definitely bend soon." "Daughter," he said, and stroked Camille's head. "Have you been given for feces? You met an evil witch. Who told you that?" Stephen was surprised at the new version of his illness. "Grandpa. He said the wicked witch was laying your feet, and our mom would soon split you open." "Well, if that's what Grandpa said, then he must have told you. Come on, bring the book. I'll read you fairy tales." Uncomplicated games with her daughter were practically Stephen's only amusement. Emily was often away from home. She always had an excuse to go shopping, or a manicure, or a massage. She no longer spent as much time with Stephen as she had at the European clinic. He was homesick, but Stephen understood she was young, and he was an invalid. She couldn't just lie down and lie next to him all day long. One night, Stephen had a terrible dream. A huge black bird grabbed Camille and dragged her away from him. Stephen flew after her on the bed, swirling eddies in their currents. He tried to catch the bird by the tail, but it kept eluding him. "Camille's daughter," he shouted and woke up. Stephen wiped the sweat on his forehead with a napkin. In the morning at breakfast, he was as gloomy as a cloud. "What's the matter with you, darling?" Emily asked. "I'm fine. Just slept badly last night. My back was flushed. We should call a doctor, have him take a look at you, and prescribe some new medication. Since these don't help anymore, don't take any. Have a good appetite, everyone." Stephen tried to lighten the mood. In the evening, he waited for his father to arrive. "Dad, I need to talk to you alone." "All right. Let's go to the garden. No one will disturb us there," answered Christopher. In the garden, the rain fell quietly on the edge. The father slowly rolled his son in a wheelchair along the path. Both were silent. The silence was interrupted by the father. "I want to make a will for my share of the business. You know, sooner or later everyone who owns any property thinks about it. It's normal. I don't think anything terrible is gonna happen to you. After all, we're past the worst of it. All we can do now is get better. I don't know. Camille's about to turn 5, and I still can't get back on my feet. Well, you know, you've got too serious an injury to be treated for a long time, and we're doing everything we can for it. Still, Dad, I want to make a will. And who do you want to include in it? Asked Christopher. A daughter. Stephen answered briefly. If I die, everything I own should go to Camille. It's logical and the right thing to do. But she's too young. And to make matters worse, the will should name a guardian for Vicky to manage her estate until she comes of age. I've already thought of that. Will that be you? You said Stephen. Christopher wheeled his son down the garden path again. Despite the rain, he was thoughtfully silent, not interrupted by Stephen's silence. After a while, already on the approach to the house, the father asked, something happened that I don't know about. Something that makes you distrust Emily. Are you sure that's fair? I'm sure. Why? We've been drifting apart lately, and I'm afraid she's gonna leave me crippled for a healthy, normal man. It's not in her best interests, Father said suddenly. Stephen looked at him in surprise. Why is that? When you were in the accident, and your condition was very bad. As the majority owner of the business, I insured all the assets. I would never leave my only daughter destitute and would always take care of her until my years were over. But to have your part of our business taken over by this, well, anyway, I took out a business insurance policy. So in the event of my death, Emily gets nothing. No, that's for sure. She'll be penniless on the street. That's why it's wise for her to be with you and her daughter, and not get a divorce. As long as she's with you, she won't have money problems, and she won't need anything. But it is worth it to give her back with her tail, and she will end up in her communal room in the Urals. Emily heard the whole conversation. She was about to go out into the garden, but she was stopped by the conversation of the men. The girl hid and heard everything to realize her dreams of a happy life in the capital could shatter at any moment. The music was playing loudly in the nightclub. Emily sat at the bar. She was already quite drunk, but she didn't stop. Say again, she said to the waiter. Would you stop? He tried to talk her out of it. I said say again. Okay, but don't be nervous. Before her eyes the story was told. There was no longer one waiter behind the bar, but two, and they were both swimming. How funny are they? Emily thought. A company sat down next to her. Suddenly, someone jumped on her with a hug. Emily, hello. How nice to see you. The girl looked in the direction of the voice. It took her a few seconds for her vision to return to normal. Oh, Jenna, why are you here alone and so pretty? Come with me to the bathroom. Let's use the old tried and true method of sobering up. The friends hugged each other and headed for the restrooms. After a while, after drinking half a liter of water and a couple of cups of coffee, Emily came to her senses. She had an unbearable urge to sob, so she burst into tears. I don't recognize you, my friend. Did someone die on you? Who? My dream almost died. But that's no reason to write it off. Make up a new dream. In the years they hadn't seen each other, Jenna hadn't lost her optimism. In the life of her friend Emily, not always everything was smooth, and sometimes life led her to such dead ends, from which it seemed that there would never be a way out. But life unloved and fun on the walls always twisted out. The girl came from Siberia, having escaped from an orphanage. Here you look at me, she said to her friend. My mother left me at the train station 3 months old, wrapped in a blanket. In the orphanage, we lived in poverty. I had to steal at the same train station. Here I got to Evelyn a couple of times. Instead of escorting her, I ended up in a viper's den. I crawled out of there bruised for days. Then I put it off. And now I'm supposed to jump off a bridge. And from the bridge, this idea is not completely sobered up. Emily answered in a voice. Come on, you can swim out of any shit in a crisis. What's wrong? I feel like a waste of space, sighed Emily. Wow, a waste of space. You have money. You live in a luxurious mansion. My husband is an invalid, but he's being treated. and may soon recover. Things will get better. Girlfriend. No, it won't. He wants to write a will and put everything in his daughter's name. Not a word about me in the goddamn paper. If anything happens to Stephen, what's to say, if he dies, I'm naked. That's what his father said, that I'd go back to the commune. Wow. Jenna was surprised. Why would they do that to you? You're still legally married. Stephen thinks I don't pay enough attention to him. In fact, you could say I don't give him any. So what's the matter? Go to your husband. Be nice to him. What am I teaching you? You know it all. I know it's boring. This is not the life I dreamed of. I thought we'd go to resorts and nightclubs. Oh, come on, girl. People who want to go to bars don't get married, Jenna said. Stephen's illness has taken so long. I mean, we've worked so hard. We've been in that clinic for a long time. We must do everything we can to make sure he gets well. Jenna said thoughtfully. You're doing everything you can to make him sad. He needs positive emotions, but then you give them to him. If you want your husband to recover, it's hard to believe I can do anything about it, but it's worth a try. I just need to feel positive emotions myself. And for that, there's a wonderful remedy Jenna's been conspiring with. What is it? Jenna took out of her purse a bag of small red pills, handed it to her friend. I recommend it. One a day and you walk like a butterfly. The friends chatted some more. Emily got home in the morning. She didn't come out for breakfast. She didn't wake up until lunchtime. Her head was splitting open. Noticing his wife's condition, Stephen asked what's wrong. You don't feel well. She decided there was nothing to hide. Yesterday I met my old friend Jenna. You must remember her. She was at our wedding, Emily said. I remember her. The blonde one with the plump lips. Stephen smiled. We went to a club and had a drink with her. Just, wanted to hang out with someone other than me. You mean honestly, don't you? Well, at least be honest. And I thought we had it all wrong. Emily hugged her husband. Things are gonna be different now. How's that? Stephen was surprised. You'll see. I'll go and get myself cleaned up. Stephen marveled every day at the changes that were happening to Emily. She was now attending his rehab sessions herself every morning, encouraging him and telling him everything would work out. She even tried to bring coffee to his room in the mornings, but the man flatly refused such a favor. No point. It's a crisis. I can go to the canteen myself and drink coffee there with everyone else. Emily was in a good mood every day. She counted cheerfully, played with Camille. Stephen looked at his wife with surprise and quietly rejoiced at her new happiness. She almost never left the house and sometimes even cooked something delicious on her own. Koshina used the cook's recipes. Now they often sat in the garden and drank coffee. They watched Camille play together. We have such a wonderful daughter, Stephen said. She'll be going to school very soon, and then we'll get her into a good college abroad. Do you have far-reaching plans? Emily laughed. I'll tell you more. I want another child. I'll have to think about it, replied the wife. And her answers surprised Stephen again. She did not oppose him and did not persuade him to wait. Sometimes their friend Emily Jenna began to visit their house. After meetings with her, the girl became even more cheerful, and in Moscow, Stephen did not oppose these meetings. Let the friends chat, especially since it favorably affects the atmosphere in their family. True, Emily began to often ask to transfer money to her card, but that didn't surprise Stephen. A wife wants to look better, to please her husband and daughter with new outfits and gifts. What's wrong with that? That day was to be another doctor's checkup. Usually he always came to the house, but this time he called beforehand and asked Stephen and Emily to come to the clinic. The girl called a special car in which people in wheelchairs can be transported, and at the appointed hour they were in the office of their attending doctor. Well, I want to please you young people. The doctor began the conversation. There is a steady, positive dynamics. Emily and Stephen looked attentively at the man in a white coat, not understanding what he wanted to say. Today we will conduct a full examination, and we will be able to adjust the treatment. Are you ready to stay at the clinic for a day? Emily and Stephen looked at each other. Ready, Stephen said. Good. Then a nurse will come and get you ready for your examination. Emily and Stephen returned home in high spirits. The doctor's prognosis was very encouraging. Stephen was clearly on the mend, having considered that Camille was already asleep. They sat in the living room by the fireplace and talked for a long time about how happy they would be once Stephen was well. They dreamed of taking their daughter to the zoo together, of going to the sea and being together forever, and maybe in the near future their family would become bigger. The couple went to sleep far past 0 o'clock. The morning began with a scream from the nanny. Emily jumped out of the bedroom, not realizing what had happened. Wendy, she asked. Nanny in a sleepy voice. I'm sorry, Emily, but I can't find Camille anywhere. I've been all over the house and her crib. Didn't she spend the night at home? God be with you, Wendy. Where would she sleep at night? I thought maybe she was visiting somewhere. What guests? What are you talking about? Stephen came out of his room in a wheelchair. The women explained to him what had happened. The man was horrified. Who was the last person to see Camille? He shouted throughout the house. Wendy, didn't you put her to bed last night? It was my night off. Emily gave me the day off. Oh my God. I grabbed my head, Emily. I thought we'd be back in no time. They're spending the rest of the afternoon at the clinic. I was putting Camille on the cook. Where's the cook? Stephen shouted again. She's nowhere to be found. I've looked for her, called her, even called her. She's not picking up, said the nanny. So don't panic. Search the whole garden, the garage, the cellar. Stephen started listing places in the mansion where the girl could hide. Search everywhere. I'll call John now. Stephen's friend arrived half an hour later, when and who last saw the girl. He started asking questions right away. We were all at breakfast yesterday morning, said Stephen. And it turns out the cook. We should call the police, John concluded. Put out an APB on your cook. Where's Camille? Where do we look for her? Emily? If we find the cook, we'll find Camille, John reassured her. Do you have an address for this woman? Yeah, somewhere. In the paperwork Christopher used to apply for the job, Emily said. Shit, Dad's overseas on a business trip. Can you find the paperwork in his office? Depressed, I said Stephen. In that case, let's run her phone number, the address on it. An hour later, the house was full of law enforcement officers. They questioned each one individually. Employees were snooping around the house, something to examine everywhere fumbled. Boiled, turned the girl's room upside down. Are you looking for anything in particular? Emily asked the captain. Maybe I can help. We're looking for anything that might indicate the presence of strangers in the house, he replied. Tell me, does the girl know how to open the wicket on the main gate and the servant's entrance on her own? No, of course not. Yes, she is strictly forbidden to go even close to the entrance. Emily answered. At that moment, Jenna, whom Emily had already called, ran into the house. Wait, who are you? A police officer stopped her. Let me in. This is Jenna, our friend. In that case, we should question you too, said the policeman, and took the girl under his elbow. They went to the table in the living room. When was the last time you saw the girl? Asked the investigator Jenna over the weekend. Here Stephen and Emily were having a picnic. We all had a good time. Didn't see anything suspicious. There was nothing suspicious. Everything was fine. Maybe some strangers came in, a delivery guy, a check delivery guy, somebody. No, we were the only family, and I used a wheelchair to get into the living room. Stephen, did you run the cook's address? Yeah, a team's on its way to her house. Gradually, the officers finished checking out the house and started to pack up. Before leaving, the investigator said to wait at home. We'll call you. Don't take any independent action. You may harm the investigation. Tell me, are you sure you will find our daughter? Stephen asked. The chances of finding a lost child in the first 24 hours are very high. So wait, we will do our best. And if the child was kidnapped? Stephen persisted. "Then the kidnappers will come after you," said the investigator. "You agree to all the terms and then inform me personally." That's the number. The investigator gave Stephen his business card. All day, Stephen, Emily, Jenna, and John stayed in the house. They said almost nothing to each other, but glanced at each other, trying to be supportive. The silence was interrupted by Stephen. "We have to tell my father." "Why?" "Stephen, he's abroad anyway." Emily asked the father of the connection. "What if he can help? We're just breaking him up. He'll worry about not being here with us." Christopher came home. The next day, the first Izvestia flight arrived. There was no news of the girl's whereabouts, just as there would be none 3 days later, and a week later, and a month later. Emily scrutinized his reflection in the mirror, standing in the bathroom. Every morning began the same way. For the 3rd month now, it began with a small red pill. They were regularly brought to the girls by Jenna. The reflection in the mirror did not bode well, only a headache. Stephen sat unmoving in his chair. With Camille missing, the house had become as empty as everyone's soul. It was not only the police who were searching for the child. Having returned from overseas, Christopher had mobilized all his connections. The security service was also joined by concerned people who organize search parties, calm the suburbs. There's no way a child can go missing without a trace. There must be something somewhere to hold on to. She couldn't have left home alone. Stephen kept talking, and just now he wasn't tearing his hair out of his chest out of helplessness. If he could walk, if he wasn't confined to a wheelchair, if he was a healthy man, he would find his daughter. He was sure of it. He was angry at the police, who he thought were inactive, angry at himself, angry even at Emily. It was his wife's fault, in his opinion, for not calling the cook, with whom his daughter was staying that ill-fated day, and not telling her that they would be staying at the clinic all day. The cook would have stayed with Camille until they arrived. Suddenly, Emily heard a thud, as if something had fallen. She started slowly down the stairs to the bottom. Stephen was lying on the floor. An overturned stroller was lying next to him. "Stephen, what's wrong?" The girl cautiously approached her husband. She shook him by the shoulder, but the man was unconscious. Emily began to frantically rummage through her bag. Looking for her phone, it was nowhere to be found. Clouding from taking the consciousness pills, the thought surfaced that there was a landline in the living room. She dialed the emergency number. "Hello, there's a man down. He's unconscious. I don't know what happened. I came in and he was lying on the floor. He's an invalid." "Yes, come quickly." She said it all slowly, and each word echoed in her head. Emily remembered how once, when she came home from school to her communal apartment, she had found her father on the floor. He seemed to be dead. The girl ran to call the neighbors, but as on sin, nobody was at home. She shook her father, screaming, "Papa, Papa." And then she sat down and cried. She cried out of pity for her alcoholic father, who had finally drunk himself to death. Then she wanted to beat him with her hands and kick him with her legs out of anger. She was really scared that the alcohol had killed her father. But why now, when her husband was lying on the floor, and as if not breathing, she was not scared at all? The EMTs brought Stephen to his senses, gave him shots. They stayed with him a little longer and left the prescription on the nightstand. The prescription went away. Emily looked at her husband and felt empty. Why should she care for him? There was nothing tying them together now. The daughter was gone. It's been 3 months, and it's unlikely she's alive. The investigator said that after 3 days, there's very little chance of finding someone alive. And it's been 3 months. Emily poured whiskey into a glass and drank it. She had been drinking more often lately. It made the pain seem less acute. Jenna had almost stopped coming over. Only sometimes, when Emily ran out of red pills. Stephen opened his eyes, looked at Emily slowly, as if through forcefully saying. Emily resumed her search for her daughter. "What's the point of this?" Already flying tongue answered the girl. "Our daughter is dead. She is no longer alive, but she is alive." Emily is still her, I know for sure. She's alive. Stephen passed out again. Emily left the room. Bullshit. The ramblings of a sick man who's been rendered unconscious by the loss of a child. Christopher came in. Oh, my father-in-law complained. There's nothing to move out. Emily. And what brings you to us? Did your city apartment flood? Or did you miss us? She staggered slightly, pouring herself another shot of whiskey. Emily stopped drinking. John will be here in a minute. We'll discuss again what we can do to find Camille. Oh, you too. Your son's still hoping his little girl's alive too. Where and how? But tell me, where and how can a 5-year-old survive alone? The little girl, Emily, was almost screaming, waving a glass of whiskey. Come on in, John. Have a seat. Have something to drink, maybe coffee. Christopher saw his son's friend entering the house. Water, if you can, John asked, and sat down in a chair. So you say, Emily, where and how alone? Or maybe she's not alone. Maybe she was kidnapped after all. Kidnapped. Maybe she was picked up on the street, and they just don't want her back. Is there such a thing? You like the kid. Let her live. Maybe Emily filled the glass again before pouring John. Who needs someone else's baby? He's a burden. You have to feed it, clothe it. But don't tell me. There are cases, like organ harvesting. The girl was dumbfounded for a minute, even seemed to sober up. What are you talking about? Shut up. What organs? The girl plopped down in the chair across from the guy. I'd rather she drowned in the river. Christopher returned to the room with a glass of water. He looked at Emily and averted his eyes. Stop drinking. I'm telling you, he raised his voice. We should be looking for the kid, and she's boozing. Since law enforcement has put their hands down, we must muster all our strength, devote all our resources to find her dead or alive. Emily's freaking out. Resources, you say? She screamed. What resources? There's your resource lying on the bed. Today he fainted and fell out of his wheelchair. Are your resources disabled? You're all in over your heads. Not today. Tomorrow I'll be a widow. No daughter, no husband. John stood up and approached Emily. He took her by the neck and looked angrily into her eyes with his words about her husband's sick inadequacy. She had put him completely out of patience. Oh, you bitch with anger, he hissed. Why don't you tell Christopher? Why Stephen became an invalid? Why he was killed in that accident? Get off. The girl yanked his arm off. Asshole. What's this about, John? Turn to the guy, man, and let her tell you how she cheated on your son. How you see, found out about it. How he went to get her out of the pub where she has fun with men. She's a foreign currency prostitute. I don't get it. Can someone please tell me what's going on here? Yes, he's all rambling drunkenly, said Emily, and leaned back in his chair. He's a prostitute himself. I have always been faithful to my husband. It was time to perplex Christopher. He looked attentively at his daughter-in-law and his son's childhood friend in turn. He could not understand what they were arguing about. But one thing was clear, they were hiding something. But he couldn't get anything out of her now. Come on, tell me, John. God knows, I didn't want to get involved, especially since I was indirectly responsible for the accident. The guy started his story. He had a business meeting with a partner at Agudal's restaurant that day. It's a small restaurant. There's no private area. So John sat at a table in the corner. He didn't want to sit and talk business in the middle of the room. His partner was late. Suddenly, Emily appeared in the restaurant. She sat down opposite a well-dressed man. It was immediately obvious from him that he was not ours, not a Russian foreigner. So he sits with his feet on his legs, swaying. She took off her slipper a little, as if it had slipped. She pulled her skirt up higher, her breasts almost on the table. She's calling out to the man with all her looks. Naturally, he gave her a bottle of champagne and came to her table. 10 minutes later, a goat was already fixing her up. And this is errata. 10 more minutes they would have been in bed. That Christopher couldn't contain his emotions. Yeah, he's lying about the mooching. Emily, I wasn't at any restaurant. When the accident happened and I realized it was serious, I went through a friend and requested security footage from the restaurant. It's all Emily, and her skirt is almost up to her navel. So before she went to bed with this foreigner, I decided to call Stephen. Christopher, forgive me. I've repented 100 times for calling. I should have gotten her out of the gym and sent her home, then called my friend. But I got emotional and called him. Stephen took everything to the restaurant. He didn't believe me. I wanted to see for myself. And then you know what happened. And he's lying in a drunken voice, and Emily persisted. John, it's true. Christopher couldn't believe his ears. Unfortunately, yes. Here's a flash drive with a recording you can see for yourself. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault. That's what anyone who cared about the fate and life of a childhood friend would do. The man opened his laptop and inserted the flash drive. The screen showed the hall of the restaurant. In a few seconds, Emily in a short skirt and heels entered it and sat down at a table. After a while, she was actually sitting with a man who was adjusting her arm, and she was flirting with him in every way possible. It was evident not only from the expression on her face, but also from her gestures. Ah, you're drinking. Christopher could not contain his emotions. Is that why my son is an invalid? That's why he's in trouble. If he hadn't been sick, if he hadn't been away from home, Camille would be here with us. Get out of here. Hey, what's your problem? Emily? That's my house too. It's your house in a communal apartment in the Urals. That's where you should go. Here you go. He threw a $5,000 bill in her driveway. I'm not going anywhere. John, be a pal and throw her out the gate with all due pleasure. The guy grabbed Emily by the arm and dragged her toward the exit. She grimaced, but her strength was unequal. She pounded on the gate for a long time. If you make noise, the neighbors will call the cops. You'll go to the monkey house. Is that what you want? Get the hell out of here, shouted John to her. Christopher sat at the table, propping his head up with his hands. John didn't know how to start a conversation. He stood silent. From the room came the faint moan of Stephen. The men ran at the voice. Stephen came to his senses. He had heard everything that had happened in the living room. Tears were streaming down his face. The doctor who came the next day to examine the patient stated that Stephen's body was severely weakened. It's irreversible. Tell me, did he take all the medications we prescribed? He asked Christopher. Unfortunately, I can't say for sure. I haven't lived in this house for the last few months. I've been staying in a city apartment. It's a shame, a real shame. Stephen wasn't just in permanent remission. He was doing great. He was improving. I didn't tell Emily and Stephen to get their hopes up. But for over 3 months now, we've had a slight sensitivity in his legs, but it was there. And now, I'm afraid, we'll just have to keep him alive with machines and medication. Stephen's room was once again filled with an enormous amount of equipment. His father hired a nurse and a nurse. Stephen was slowly fading away, and there was nothing the doctors could do. Emily's friend Jenna was from a small Siberian town. After her father stabbed her mother to death in an alcoholic frenzy, she ended up in an orphanage. The girl was only 10 years old, but she had already suffered so much that not every adult to half of life tossed by fate. Finding herself in an unfamiliar place where there were many children, and no one seemed to notice her, she found the farthest corner on the playground and sat silently on a bench. You're new. Jenna was brought out of her daze by the voice of a boy who sat down next to her. Yes. What's your name? Jenna. I'm Beetle. The boy said cheerfully. Jenna looked at him in surprise. Why a bug? She didn't get it from the makeup. I got it here because my last name is Beetle. My name is Jack, but I like it better. Jack is some kind of dog name. Did your parents give you up? Did Jenna hesitate to tell or not? To a boy, she didn't know the truth about her life. My daddy stabbed my mom to death. I came home from school, and she was lying on the floor with a lot of blood, and my father was gone. I called the neighbor, and she called the police. And then they took me here. It's awful, Jack said. Don't be afraid of anything here. I'll protect you. You want me to. The girls here are mean. And the boys fight all the time. You tell me if anything happens. Okay. The beetle ran away, and Jenna stayed on the bench until they called for dinner. From that day on, she had a reliable protector. No one touched the girl, but she wasn't invited to be friends with other kids. But the beetle was always near. They often escaped from the orphanage at night and fried bread on the fire on the riverbank. It was the beetle who taught her how to smoke, cigarettes, and pot. And when they graduated from the orphanage, he got a bottle of wine somewhere. You've never had a drink. Of course not. Now we're gonna get drunk and have fun. Why sit there with those fools on our shore? It's much better. They drank wine, smoked cigarettes, and laughed a lot. Beetle became Nastyu's first man. Although, in fact, they were still teenagers, but after the feelings they experienced, they realized that they were now adults. And where are you going? After the orphanage, asked Jenna Guy. I'm going to the capital. There are a lot of people there. I'll probably find a job. The beetle bought a cigarette and handed it to Jenna. Yeah, but what kind of seamstress am I? I want to be a photo model. The beetle laughed and fell on the grass. Wine intoxicated their heads, and life seemed to open up 1,000s of possibilities. Hey, photo model. The guy kept laughing. You can't get a job there without connections, and someone has to have a potato nose. Jenna pouted, and already puffy lips took offense, but after a minute rolled on the grass with her friend, choking with laughter. Where are you going? Suddenly serious, she asked. I don't know yet, but definitely not to the factory. It's not for me to hump at the machine. And every day I burned a cigarette and took a puff. I'll probably go to David. He promised to help with the work, and in general with David you won't be lost. David was a sort of local provincial authority. He collected tribute from small businessmen and market traders. Beetle often moonlighted doing his small errands. He chewed the fat with cigarettes and weed. When money appeared, made little gifts to Jenna in the form of hairpins or beads. Guy liked that the work wasn't dusty, and David always treated him favorably. He's a former orphanage kid himself. After graduation from the orphanage, the guy's paths diverge. Jenna, really at the first opportunity, left and fell into the ranks of Courtney and Evelyn. She was quite content with a well-fed and beautiful life that was in no comparison to what she saw in her backwater. They had met completely by chance at Jenna's nightclub. What about you? She heard a familiar voice in the semi-darkness and clouds of cigarette smoke. She looked at the guy who stood in front of her for a few seconds. The girl hung around the guy's neck. Where'd you come from? Oh, life has brought me here. Come on, sit down. Tell me all about it. Have you been here long? No, I've been here a few months on business. I'm just hanging around till I can't go anywhere. What meeting? Jenna was broadcasting. We should celebrate. Let's order a drink. The girl told about her life, about the crowds with whom she had to go to different events, go on business trips and on vacation to have fun, and sometimes even sleep with them. Beetle was more silent, only looked at her with a strange look. Where do you live? Suddenly asked Jenna. I rented a shanty town in the suburbs. I don't have any more money, but there are ways to get some good dough. You want to get a job. You're going to get a job. The girl laughed. Yeah. I'm in a hurry. No, Jenna. Now real dough can be raised, and not working every day will share. Maybe they started meeting at the nightclub from time to time. One day, a bug offered Jenna little red pills at a flying thing. Just don't get addicted in a hurry, a friend suggested. But it's great for selling to suckers and expensive. Asked Jenna. It's all right. It's enough to live on. You got someone to offer it to. Yeah, I got a rich friend here. Doesn't need money. Husband's got money. So go ahead, we'll split the profits. At the next meeting, the bug told Jenna that he took a large shipment of red pills, and we need to push as soon as possible to pay off the supplier. Where are we pushing so many times? puzzled Jenna. You have a lot of girlfriends, acquaintances. In the club again, constantly hang out, advised the guy. Stephen was fading away. Christopher hardly ever left the house, despite the constant presence of the nurse. He tried to spend more time with his dying son. The doctor began to come less and less often and more often just listen to the patient's condition over the phone. In the rare hours when Stephen regained consciousness, he would say to his father in a weak voice, "Dad, how can this be? I'm gonna die without ever seeing my little girl. My Queen Camille, we're looking for her, son." Christopher tried to comfort his son, but he didn't believe he would ever find his granddaughter alive. It seemed as unreal as curing his only son who was terrifying in front of his eyes. He himself often fell into despondency, realizing that in his old age he would be alone in this huge house. But not so long ago, there were voices here. Little Camille was running around. "I don't want to die without seeing my daughter," Stephen said. He was going crazy, not knowing what to do for his son. The doctor said that medicine does not yet know a cure for his disease. The only thing that can be done is to help him bear the pain. But the painkillers were working. The bad ones didn't last long, and they had to be replaced with better ones all the time. In the hours of unconsciousness, Stephen was delirious. He kept saying his daughter's name, calling her name, and calling her queen. And Christopher couldn't hold back the tears as he watched his son suffer. If Camille had been there, Stephen would be easier. He wouldn't be in so much pain. She's his comfort, he thought, but it had been 2 years since Camille had disappeared. There was no chance of finding her. The bug called Jenna and said they had to meet urgently. "What's the rush?" asked the girl, falling into the soft chair opposite her friend. "We have problems." Conspirator in such a tone, began Beetle. "I was almost taken by the cops. I barely got away." "Well, you did, so live and enjoy it," said Jenna. "Light a cigarette." "I left, but I had to dump the whole lot." "Are you out of your mind?" Jenna pulled her eyes out. "What was I supposed to do if they took me in with the merchandise? You'd be in the slammer for 12 years. Where'd you get the money? I'd be stabbed to death by the dealers. I don't even know what's worse, the cops or the dealers." Jenna smoked thoughtfully. Over the past few months, she had become a real dealer at the Beetle, and the two of them were great at knocking down pills and breaking in well. She had even considered how to pay Evelyn off and start a new life. Now, if the bar girls get the bug, he'll pull her down with him, which means it's a two-person problem. "I have one option," she said thoughtfully. "Do you remember my friend, to whom I sold wheels, but whose husband is disabled?" "Yes, yes. So you can steal her daughter, her husband. Wouldn't spare any money for her daughter. He loves her. Are you crazy? Steal a child." The Beetle waved his arms. "Do you have any other options?" asked Jenna. "It's not hard. He's confined to a wheelchair. His wife is a peasant fool and can't do anything on her own. Take the girl, then set a ransom, and on the appointed day get the money, and return the child. We just have to find a place to hide her while they prepare the ransom. I've already got a Beetle in my shack." "That's a good idea. The girl knows me well, so it shouldn't be a problem. I'll tell you the day when everything will be done." Stephen was getting worse. Every day the irreversible processes in his body became more and more obvious. Christopher was discouraged but watched his son's condition and agonized at his inability to do anything about it. Tormented by his helplessness, cursing the failure of medicine, calling on the help of the Lord God. Sometimes Stephen's delirium became so horrible that inside the man walked. "Daughter," raved Stephen, holding out his arms. "You've been found, my darling. You've come to your daddy. My little one, don't go away. Sit down next to me. Bring me a book and I'll read it to you. Where's your new Camille doll? Her legs still won't bend, just like your daddy's." At times like this, Christopher would give all his fortune, all his money, just to make his son feel better, just so he wouldn't suffer. But he was powerless to fight his son's illness and could not even alleviate his suffering. If Camille had been there, Stephen would have had an easier time, a much easier time. That day, when Stephen and Emily went to the clinic, Camille stayed with the cook. The girl was playing quietly in Camille's nursery. "Come on, I made you some cheese. Your favorite," called the housekeeper to the girl. Camille obediently sat down at the table. She ate with pleasure and drank juice. "Now go play in the garden, little girl," said the cook. "Look how nice the weather is. Take your favorite doll and walk with her. I'll take everything." The housekeeper took care of the chores. Vicky's nanny had the day off today, so the owners asked her to look after the baby. "It's no big deal. Camille is a very obedient girl. She won't be a problem." It's not the first time the cook has stayed with the child. From time to time, she looked out the window where Camille was playing with her dolls on the lawn. When the housekeeper went to the window to see what the child was doing, she did not see Camille on the lawn. The woman ran out into the yard, calling loudly for Camille. "Camille, where are you?" But there was no answer. The woman rushed to look in the garden, ran all up to the nursery again. The child might be there, but even there the little girl did not appear. Not knowing what to do, the housekeeper at first wanted to call Stephen and Emily, but then imagined the responsibility she might incur for Camille's disappearance. Those rich men wouldn't just fire her, they'd put her in jail. The cook quickly took off her apron and left the house. At that moment, running away seemed to her the only right thing to do. She could run to her aunt's house, and no one would find her. Jenna brought Camille to the apartment rented by a bug on the outskirts of the city. The girl had a doll in her hands. "Where is my mom?" asked the girl Camille. Affectionately said Jenna. "Mommy and Daddy went to the doctor to fix Daddy's feet, and you and I are going to stay here. We'll wait here." Okay. In 2 hours, the girl was hungry, but there wasn't any food in the cold. Jenna called her partner in crime. "Buy the kids something to eat." "Why?" "I don't know what they eat." "Well, buns. Buy yogurt. Apple. I don't know what they feed her either." The bug showed up on the doorstep of the apartment an hour and a half later with a bag of groceries. Sorting out the purchases, Jenna grumbled. "Why did you buy vodka? We need a sober head, and you decided to get drunk." "I'm getting the jitters from all this," replied the beetle. "I'm nervous. The parents have probably already discovered that the girl is gone." "I don't think so," said Jenna. "They've gone into town for a doctor's appointment, and that will take some time. The servants are probably panicking by now when we demand a ransom. Wait, we need to give them time to get nervous. We can't do anything until tomorrow. I'll go to them, find out what's going on in the house, what they think, and what they're willing to do for their daughter." Camille, sitting on the floor, chewed a bun. Beagle and Jenna looked at her. They are not going to hurt her. Just have her parents give them $1 million for her, and that's it. Back to normal. All night Camille cried and called for her mom and dad. The kidnappers didn't know how to calm her down, and the neighbors could hear the baby crying behind the wall and call the police. However, in this barracks, the neighbors are alcoholics. They are unlikely to care about the cries of a child. After spending a sleepless night and calming the girl in the morning, finally everyone fell asleep. The next day, Jenna went to her friend, who had already called her, and told her what had happened. She returned with a look of panic on her face. Dan, everything was gone from the doorstep, she declared. "Missing how? Don't they want the baby?" "Well, they do. They're all worked up in there. A house full of police. That's half the problem. You could tell them not to call the police or we'd kill the kid." They certainly wouldn't have called. I know both Emily and Stephen well. What didn't the beetle realize? Stephen's father is coming, Jenna answered. And what didn't the sidekick realize? What? This isn't Stephen's invalid wife and Emily's idiot. This is a serious man with connections with his security service, which will quickly calculate us. He's not gonna fall for a ransom like that. Emily tried to talk Stephen out of calling his father. I thought he'd listen to her. But that handicapped guy realizes he can't find his daughter without a hitch. So what do we do now? The frustrated Beetle sat down on the couch. I don't know. Let's think about it. What if we can't get a ransom for the girl? Where are we gonna put the baby? I mean, they're looking everywhere for him. Yeah, the police are all over it. All exits from the city are blocked. All neighborhoods are being searched. Her picture's all over the TV channels, and there's groups of concerned people all over the city looking for her, and the police are involved. And then there's this John friend Stephen. He's also a complicated man with connections, and he can return a lot of things. She's not gonna get away with it. How do we get her back? And the ransom? The guy cried out. Are you stupid? What ransom? Jenna shouted indignantly. As soon as we make a call, we'll be instantly figured out or taken in when we hand over the money. So, I don't get it. How are we going to give the money to the dealers? Shut up. Jenna began to lose her temper, and it was necessary to think calmly how to behave further and what to do with the child. She went to the window and smoked a cigarette. There were no options. They themselves hung another article on themselves in addition to drugs and kidnapping a child. With such cases, any court would send them to jail for 20 years. And then Jenna had a crazy idea. Hello, Evelyn. When Christopher appeared on the doorstep with the girl, the housekeeper, aghast, dirty, grimy, the child did not dare, stomped on the mat. The girl was wearing tattered clothes clearly off the adult shoulder sleeves. She briskly tucked our coat and up to the shoulders on her feet, boots size 3 more. Who's that? Christopher? She asked in bewilderment. Please wash the baby properly when you scratch it. And yes, look in the room. Camille, some things for her there in the closet. There's probably something that was bought for growing up. The man looked at the girl with an appraising gaze, though she's not much different in stature from my granddaughter. Small, skinny. You'll find something, I think. The housekeeper answered well. She took the girl into the bathroom and undressed her, and squeamishly put her clothes in a garbage bag. The woman bathed the child for a long time in the warmer, and she kept quiet, although it was obvious that she did not like bathing at all. Apparently, it's unaccustomed. What? She hasn't been bathed for 6 months. I thought the housekeeper rubbed the girl's body. The scent with soap. For the 3rd time, the child was very thin. Blue veins shining through the thin skin. The woman wrapped her in terry towels, sat her in a chair. Then she combed her blonde hair, made her pigtails sick. Now you look like a normal child. And Nena Onishchenko from the underpass, the kind that begs for money. She said more to herself than to the girl. But the girl suddenly replied, all the children there are like that. It's cold, and you can't wash. Poor thing. The woman's heart was overcome with pity and tenderness. Come on, I'll feed you. The housekeeper put on the girl a pink Camille dress and pantyhose and put on her feet a homemade shoe and took her to the dining room. At the table, the child ate with the greediness of an animal that had not been fed for a long time. She ate a whole bowl of soup and happily began putting drinking juice. When Christopher entered the dining room, he sat down opposite the child and looked at the girl carefully. For about 5 minutes, he looked at her without taking his eyes off her. And suddenly, the man's eyebrows crept upward, and his eyes began to round. This is incredible, he exclaimed. What's your name, child? Camille replied as she continued to chew. Tears rolled down the man's face. He could not contain his emotions. In front of him sat his granddaughter, his Camille, who had disappeared 2 years ago. Auntie, why is Uncle crying? Asked the little girl to the housekeeper. Push, and the little girl stroked her head. Christopher stared at the child. He could not believe that he had found his granddaughter, whom no one had been able to find for 2 years. He couldn't wait to bring her to Stephen, but he waited patiently for the child to eat. When the girl had finished eating, he said to her, "Come with me. I'll introduce you to someone." The girl obediently took the man's hand. They went to Stephen's bedroom. He was asleep. Christopher moved the chair, the bed, his son. "Sit down," he told his granddaughter. He decided that they would sit together at Stephen's bedside for as long as it took, until his son came to his senses, Let him see his daughter in front of him. Let him be glad that she had been found. Stephen opened his eyes. His gaze hadn't been meaningful lately, to come to his senses and realize what was happening around him. He needed some time. The man stared at the ceiling for a long moment, then began to sweep the room with his eyes, looking for the nurse or his father. His gaze stopped on the child sitting in the chair. "Camille," a little audibly, he said. "You've been found, my girl." "Yes, son, I have found our Camille." A faint, but so pure and happy smile appeared on Stephen's face. Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. "Look, it's like an American movie," Adriana said. "The night, the moon." It sounded so solemn, she felt. Michael was laughing now. Besides, he didn't like the moon. "That big yellow fool sticking herself out in the foreground for no good reason," he said. "Well, Kathy, it'll light up the craters. It'll light up the craters." He imagines himself a second sun. "The moon," continued Adriana, "and the two on the hill by the telescope. Beautiful boy, beautiful girl. I'll be right back to you. Smile. All 32 teeth. A dentist I know told me that. In the West, they put in crowns as white as a plumber's smile. I'll ask if there's life on Mars. Are you interested in complex forms, or will bacteria suffice?" Michael was adjusting the telescopes to something unknown to her. She felt rather than saw his instantaneous flying smile. Compared, Adriana thought, "How beautiful I am." Compared to him, so ordinary a face, they were both close to 18. Adriana is short, sturdily built with well-developed forms of dark brown and clean hair, and cut short her facial features are large, regular. Dressed simply jeans, sweater, no jewelry, no perfume scent. Only Michael, and maybe Ethan Forresters knew about the quiet abyss in which is known. In short, whether Adriana is good or not. It's still a question of a lover who will like it, who will not. But Michael, such a thin face, such eyes at him, look at him, mouth ajar and breathless. You stand there and you forget what you wanted to say. The prince is the scion of royalty. Of course he is. Michael's dad is not a king, but a minister in the regional government. Michael's mother is a ballerina, former prima ballerina of the opera and ballet theater. Now she teaches at a choreographic school. When Michael invited Adriana to visit, she invariably refused. She was uncomfortable. She was afraid that she would feel like a hostess who was being scrutinized through a microscope. She hesitated whether to swat it or let it run. What was Adriana to them? Zero. No stick. Fatherless. A daughter, teacher of Russian language and literature. For the 100th time to sort out the numbskulls, captain's daughter. It's not for you to decide matters of national importance or dance the part of Giselle. Michael's parents are probably afraid of the girl he's trying to be friends with, in case the unworthy candidate still manages to seduce their son. Does he need an ordinary wife? Michael will finish school, continue his education somewhere in London, get a job in the cloudy heights, then it will be possible to look around and choose a wife among equals. Until then, no. No, no. And this girl in jeans has to be taken away. No, she'll be treated quite nicely. But Michael called her. You'll be watching your favorite Mars. My favorite Venus, muttered Adriana. I hate the color red. Look, Michael looked at her even cheerfully. It's a scary business. 470 degrees in the shade. But remember when you showed it to me. It's as dazzling as a diamond, and its lands bear the names of our goddesses of love. Give it up, said Michael Archipelago, and Char, and Aphrodite, and the land of Hellas. And then there are the mountains of Freddie West. Adriana remembered everything he had told her. But look, it's much more interesting here. Michael, what's here? Adriana nestled into the telescope, fixing her eyes on Marcelo's nose. It's not a big deal. It's just Buzina talking. Wait for it. We'll live to see the confrontation. Then everything will be for you, mademoiselle. With our pleasure, you'll see the polar caps of the sea in storms. Will you stop it already? Here, Michael. A mother's voice as clearly as if Christina was standing next to him. How long can you play with your stars? You're 18 years old, grew up Versta Kolomenskoy, all the same. Shall I remind you who's to blame? You should ask Michael. You and your mom. Not so often, but his mother still took him little to visit her friends. They were all young then, all dancing. Michael knew what was waiting for him there. Women as thin, smooth-jawed as his mother, and the same veins showing through on the high bangs. And they talk excitedly about ballet, about stage parties, teachers. If Michael had been asked, he would have said that he hated ballet, but not because of the director's tricks or the fact that his mother was interested in nothing but dancing. No, ballet had become his personal enemy. On a quiet evening hour, when he entered his mother's room without knocking, carrying Captain Grant's children in his arms, perhaps Mama would read to him. She was lying on the sofa, dozing by the climate-covered plaid. That plaid was always with her. She used to throw it over her shoulders as if it were a shawl. All Mom's energy went to the stage. And at home, she was fragile, tired. Peace all the time. She lay with her arm behind her head. Stretched out, her feet were bare. Michael walked over and forgot what he wanted to ask. He hadn't seen this before. He remembered his mom in high-heeled shoes. 30. Number 3. Cinderella. And the little feet were very much in keeping with Mommy's easy, graceful appearance. And at home, Christina invariably wore soft, Uggy boots. God, they feel so good. She kept repeating to change her shoes. Or did she say nothing? Just a blissful sigh of relief. And what he saw now were not his mom's feet. No, they belonged to some kind of monster. Unnaturally long fingers and pinky toes, as if broken calluses were stone, dark, on his left foot. The toenail on his big toe blue, like it's been hit with a hammer. And this is with a mother who takes such care of every little thing. Takes a long time to pick out her dress and jewelry. If there's a night out, she changes her hair several times. Michael guessed. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. Wasn't Mom tortured by her feet? Ugly feet and flying across the stage are two sides of the same coin. But how much does it hurt? Beauty. Michael remembers having the same blue elbow when he accidentally jammed his arm in a door. But his mom elevated every trifle into a tragedy, just as pain is not considered a tragedy. It doesn't matter to her, and it doesn't matter to Aunt Clara. But I'm sorry, he couldn't bear his mom's suffering. He's always been very sensitive to pain. And when Mom was telling a hard story about a performance that was excruciating for her, when she could barely hold on to the end, she noticed that Michael took hold of his whiskey. What's wrong with you? It hurts. It's like a bow to the heart. Mom remembered that expression and asked about the play. But it would be like a bow on the heart. So you want to hear it. And that time she, feeling Michael near her, awakened from fashion, intercepted his gaze and hurriedly tangled her feet. With a smile, she tried to show her son that it was nothing. It was nothing. But how beautifully, she said. Point in Russian just means point. A point. We touch the ground with 2 points or even 1. That's the calluses. You can fly only on their calluses, and rubbed his hair. Do birds have calluses on their wings? Michael asked. And since Christina did not answer immediately, he explained to himself. You can't see them. They have feathers. You'll go to the dance school too, said Mother. Like it's a done deal. You'll find out for yourself what kind of life it is. Did he shake his head? No. But Christina didn't react in any way to his no. Apparently, she just decided not to insist at that moment. However, she had determined Michael's fate for herself. Understand that she proved to her husband, who was not thrilled with the fact that the son will be made more Ron. Michael, on the other hand, would be Siegfried's ideal. He has the data. I get it. Michael almost burst into tears. So you're serious? Stop mocking me. I'm not going dancing. He imagined mangled fingers, all the body aches, and the daily grind at the bear. Just show them to the committee. Just show them to me. Christina convinced him a few months later. What have you got to lose? Don't worry. They'll see your sour face, and they'll give you a turn and go frozen. The admission tests were held in 3 stages. Michael on the girl couldn't. There were more girls in the crowd. Want to volunteer to sit on the ballet galleys, fat and thin, tall and short haircut. And with a bow, someone is nervous and pulls mom's hand. Others repeat the voiced dance moves. Others have tears in their eyes. Michael defiantly turned away to the window. It is better to look at a rainy day on a wet black path in the park, to follow the drops running down the glass, than to look at this general madness, or to hear the usual annoying whispers. Look, 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 what a handsome boy. A quarter of an hour later, the handsome boy stood in front of the admission committee, and despite the fact that he was almost naked in just his panties, looked at the maestros mockingly with a look all those. Turn around, raise your head, stand on your toes, he performed quickly and carelessly. And the same mockery was felt in his movements. He's a perfectly built boy, the older man said. Of course, maybe he'll grow up too. But for now, yes, the lady supported him softly. As smoothly as his mother, she came up to correct his arm, and he noticed what a beautiful brooch on her chest. At the bottom of the deep cut of the black dress in the stone, a glow shimmering, sparks like a starry sky. The dropout was big, very big. When she and Christina were leaving, Michael saw tears in the eyes of not only the children, but the moms as well. In the second phase of the trials, the doctors took over. Here there were fewer marriages. About 100 people reached the 3rd round. Of them had to choose 30. You will be played a piece of music. Mom forced and offered to dance. I'll dance for them. Michael fought. And finally he's standing in the middle of the hall. The accompanist is a little extra on the piano. She started to play. Michael recognized the waltz from the first bars, and not wanting to act, he threw off his arms and spun. He flew around the big hall, enjoying the freedom, because it was still cramped at home, and here you can run around. A few minutes later, Michael opened the door. Christina stepped up to meet him and got what she wanted. Almost hatefully, he shouted. I was accepted and went ahead of her down the hall, putting his hands in his pockets, not wanting to look back. Seeing me off and whispering to the crowd. He didn't need ice cream now. He studied at the school for 2 years and finally became convinced that they have nothing in common with ballet. All those endless rehearsals, shouting teachers. Long leg, long leg, long leg. Step back on your left foot. You, or rather the foot, let the heel smile. And this pain that came as he expected the dreams and excitement of his fellow students, about roles, about performances. It was all completely foreign to him. Dove said, at last, to his mother, the old pedagogue Zakar, having studied in vain all this time with Michael, don't you drive him with a stick along this path. A slave is not a praying mantis. Your boy deliberately doesn't want to do what I believe. How do you expect him to go on learning? Do you know what high school is like? Don't torture your son. Put him in a regular school. Christina was silent for a few days. Michael didn't interfere. He didn't approach her with questions. He understood his mother had to get over the collapse of the dream of his ballet career. So what? Soon everything would be back to normal. And to get under the hot hand to hear harsh and unfair words he did not want. In the end, his parents put him in an English special school and took a breath. Still, not exactly a rank-and-file path. The school is elite, and the child from a long struggle with ballet took it as a respite. And she's doing great. The only memory of the past. Mom takes him to visit her when she has a ballet society gathering. You'll remember later that you knew these people. Maybe if Michael were older, he'd appreciate them. But to a 12-year-old boy, talking about ballet is intolerably boring. And they don't even finish the sentence. They just start to say a few words, and then they laugh. They understand. They're their own. Aunt Clara doesn't have a cat or a dog. Michael had already eaten the cake. Now that the diet was over, he was putting in his second piece. Stretching the pleasure with a spoon, he poked windows in the soft biscuit and imagined that it was a knight's castle and from above along the Kremlin in their one-time walk centuries. Sitting mentally recalled the novels of Walter Scott, and the piece disappeared unnoticed from the saucer. Finally, Michael crept away into the big pale green armchair and dropped his head on his arm. He sat as artistically as his mother's embodied wistfulness. Aunt Clara, passing by, stroked his hair lightly. Poor failed Siegfried is bored. But look at this. The pictures are pretty. I lowered into his lap an expensive, heavy volume. It was an album called Mysteries of the Universe. Telescope pictures of planets, stars, comets, nebula. Michael gazed out and up the world and disappeared forever. Before him lay galaxies and crystal whorls. Inexpressibly bright comet tails of unearthly colors splashed. Where does the path of these eternal pages begin, and where does it end? And what mesmerizing names of stars! Ahurnar, the abode of Daisy Antares. One of Michael's favorite fairy tales was the story of Jack, who threw magic grains into the ground. From them grew babas reaching for the unknown heights. What's beyond the clouds? Jack thought, and he climbed up into the sky. And on the clouds stood a fairy tale castle, and the story began, which Michael lived many times, mentally reincarnated into Jack. A single cloud with a castle on it and an enchanted princess who could be conjured would be enough for him. But deep down, Michael had always known it was a fairy tale. What he saw now, however, was a truth that could be seen with his own eyes every night. And what was inaccessible to the eye was confirmed by telescopes. So why do people live past this? Why was no one he knew shocked by it as he was now? Michael knew it from himself, from his family. They don't see the night sky for years. Forget there are stars in the sky. Busy with their own things, so small. Before this splendor, before these worlds, living, breathing with them, pulsing. Mama instructed Adriana to pick the last of the graves. Once upon a time, the cottage was loved by the whole family. One of Vera's first memories is of her father building a small white brick house. Then it is covered with wooden carvings and next to the pool for the child to splash. And Rosnef's mother is happy. She has always loved this labor on the land, planting thin branches. This will be a cherry tree. This will be an apple tree. Then the parents separated. Adriana was 6 years old. She understood what had happened in a childish way. Daddy was taken away by Aunt Cindy. He packed very quickly because Mommy was yelling at him, took his suitcase and left. Yesterday was today, no sign of him. Mom decided not to call Dad, no matter what happened. She cut out of the local newspaper phone numbers of different firms like Man for an Hour called, so that from there they came to nail up, to fix. The dacha was the most dilapidated of all. At the end of that September day, Adriana felt like an acrobat, balancing on the balcony to reach the grates. It would fall off. 3 meters to fly. And down below, the pool my father had built was empty. Now, once in a lifetime, everything will fall into it. And then how to get help. Going down was even more difficult. There was a heavy bag in each hand, and even on the railing one could not count on it. We couldn't grab them with our teeth. It was getting dark, and Adriana walked along the deserted dacha streets cautiously. Who else might she meet? And against the sky she saw a silhouette. On the hillside, a man was setting up something that reminded her of a telescope. Their eyes met, and Adriana had never before shouted at a stranger. Suddenly, she asked, "What's that?" "I'm sorry, of course. But it's dark. You can't see anything." And just as unexpectedly, Michael suggested that you'd like to see it. They were on their way back. Michael always saw Adriana off. It was her mom's request that he take her to the driveway. But if her mom hadn't said a word, they themselves have developed a ritual of parting, a confident door. "I want to ask." Michael stopped. He stood, now blocking her way. And she could tell from his voice that he was very uncomfortable. "Will you marry me?" That her face trembled as if it had never even occurred to her. "What are you talking about?" And she got ready to go again. "Wait," he held her back. You just don't want to. Then there's no question about it. Or you're saying no because there's another reason. Wait, I don't get it. What made you decide to get married in the first place? Well, girls want to get married. So there's 7 of them. But nowadays, who gets married at 18? Exams are coming up. Then my father wants to send me to London to study. She lowered her head. He noted her grin. And the fact that she couldn't raise her eyes to him for a while. So you're afraid of London with me? He kept his hands on her shoulders. Adriana couldn't find a word for it. Aw, you understand how I'm going to live. I'm out there and you're in here. With despair, he asked. We've been apart for years. We're at war at home now. Because of me. Adriana was afraid. No, I'm not going because of England. I'm not going anyway. Let them do what they want. But you and I should not be prevented from pulling, separating. No parents, no more hiding, no more excuses. Your father and mother will never agree to me. Adriana said quietly. And that London. They'll send you there anyway. And then marry a rich man with a whistle. When they decide it's time. Listen to me. Michael looked into her eyes, and now she couldn't look away. No one's sending me anywhere. If my parents accept you, you will. I will, Adriana said. I'll close my eyes. I will agree and live in this fairy tale for 10 minutes, and then I will open my eyes. Michael leaned over and kissed her. It was the 2nd hour of the night. No one was in the park, and they stood there, embracing and singing to each other. They couldn't tear themselves away. For the first time, this lust for them broke through, and neither one could sway it. To the first, everything ceased to matter. Adriana had forgotten already that her mother was waiting for her at home. It hadn't occurred to Michael that his parents might be anxious just to be together. That was the only thing that mattered. Adriana didn't remember her heart pounding like that. The willow branches swayed in the sky in the breeze. The stars seemed to sway with the young leaves. Mom didn't turn away from the window when Adriana came into the room. At least he saw her off. Mom sighed. She realized how brief this pair of maidenhoods would be for Faith. Forgetting everything and wandering with her beloved by the hand. The exam wasn't called, Mom said. I'm sorry. I forgive him because he does walk you to the driveway. If he didn't walk you home, I'd forbid it. So you wouldn't have to feel guilty and make excuses. Adriana remembered Michael's words. Very hungry. Want, she said, quietly distracting her mother's thoughts that you're not turned on to the cafe to have dinner. Parents do not give money to love and feed. For Mom were synonyms. Now she was suffering that Adriana had been hungry all evening and therefore neglected and unloved. Mom believed that she and Adriana were the two she and Adriana had left for each other. The only picture kept in the album was one where Mom was taken with her father. At one time, Adriana had kept it from being torn up. Here you are so young, good Mom, never feeling sorry for herself and willing to stay up late into the night sick or well, cooking, drinking, and washing. But Adriana was born and turned out to be a weak, sickly child. The frail girl seemed to her father to be from another planet. With a sturdy boy, everything would have been clear from him. From the very beginning, the father would start raising a real man and a soldier, and all those doll bows under the crocheted throats. In the middle of the night, Mom would get up to warm the beast. Milk to take away the coughing. She'd turn on the light. They had a one-room apartment and saw her husband annoyingly cover his head with a pillow. Maybe you should take a vacation and go somewhere in a preventorium to rest, Mom suggested, forgetting herself again in the preventorium. Dad liked it. He was an excellent dancer. And for 3 weeks of vacation, he danced Cindy, a cheerful blonde. When he came back, he wasn't himself. He was so gloomy, he wouldn't lift his head. Adriana's mother told me years later. I kept asking him what was wrong. And he wouldn't say a word. He wouldn't say a word. Then he told Kathy. Kathy, the worst thing happened. I went over everything in the world. I thought he'd been recruited by a foreign intelligence agency. And he told me, I met another woman. It was the only time in my life my mother ever beat my father. I don't remember what I grabbed then, just a pot lid. I think he only covered my head with his hand. You see, I wanted what was best for you. You're sick. I did the remodeling without him. Wallpaper. The service is hard. Let him rest at home. He's such an animal. Father decided that he'd been punished enough, and now he could leave with a clear conscience. He packed his things and moved in with Cindy. Apparently, even she couldn't believe it was so easy. And the ex-wife doesn't try to get her husband back, at least for the sake of the child. So Cindy insisted. The father appealed to his superiors, and he was transferred to somewhere in the suburbs, where the young couple and departed. The reminder of the father remained a receipt for alimony, once a month, appearing in the mailbox, and my mother's firm conviction that she herself would never try to arrange a family life again. I can't face the table a second time. Don't believe it. No luck. That love, deceit, fake gold. One pain, not to be alone in old age. It's better to give birth to a child and then touch a man. We'll grow up, Mom said. In her heart, no doubt that this is the only option that awaits Adriana. I'll help. And the main thing for you now is to finish the institute and find a good job so that you don't depend on any Porsche in your life. Michael's mother didn't like him, but she tolerated him because he was raised in a decent family, and the rite of courtship, memorable to his mother since his youth, he performed rigorously. He asked permission to take Adriana for a walk and brought her back on time. Mom thought that nothing serious would come out of this relationship. Adriana was no match for this boy, as they say nowadays, a major. But if still Mom was afraid to think about it, let her daughter give birth to a beautiful and healthy baby. You can tell by Michael's good blood. And the grandparents on the other side will help. It's so hard to raise a child alone. Still, Mom wanted Adriana to be just her daughter for as long as possible, with the simple worries of what to wear, where to go, what book to read, so that no men would intrude on their little world. Kelly was a small, dark-haired, hairy girl with a look that was all her own. Amazing femininity. Adriana had been friends with Kelly since first grade, and in recent years the girls had sat at the same desk. Adriana kept peeking out, and I couldn't wait to tell her about yesterday's proposal. But where had she gone? The class was about to start. Kelly ran into the classroom at the last minute. Her plaid dress was cinched with a wide sash. Her waist was as slim as an actress in the last century. "Where have you been?" "Mother, you know," explained panting and Kelly, laying out her textbooks on the desk. "Dresses yesterday washed on the balcony, hung not dried. I didn't even have time for breakfast. The iron was up to sushi. And Michael called me to marry." Adriana wanted to say it nonchalantly, like a cursive, but a smile blossomed irresistibly on her face. "Wow," Kelly whispered in shock from the old man already entering the classroom. "And when last night? That's not what I mean. When he wants you to get married right after graduation, and his parents agree, Williams and Smith said, and old man, why don't you let me start the lesson? It's people like you that make it hard to explain things. Keep your mouths open. So open your notebooks, write down the new topic, and then read the textbook and the outline." We had to wait until recess, and then Kelly bombarded Adriana with questions, the most important of which was, "Is there really a wedding? Not a jinx. What are you afraid of? Even the prince is marrying anyone nowadays. Thank you. I'm already off the scrap heap, you know." My friend attacked Adriana again. "My older sister left me a hat and some beautiful white gloves in a box on the mezzanine. I'll go get it. My mom keeps everything. And she says, 'Kelly, don't get married so fast. I haven't had time to save up anything. If you get to the registry office, I'll go to the world.'" After school, Kelly and Adriana usually took a leisurely walk home. But today Adriana was on class duty, along with Ethan. So Kelly sighed and went home alone. Ethan was a tall, blond boy with a keen eye. Ethan was always dressed in the same protective color, a light jacket twist open, revealing a calfskin jacket. Everyone knew that his father was a forgotten alcoholic, and since Ethan was a little boy, he was considered the only male in the family. Usually, the duty officers divided the class in half. You wash half, and me half wipes the blackboard, watering the flowers with a mop. I can do it myself. Ethan quit, scrubbing the floors. He was surprisingly dexterous in his sporadic movements, twisted a heavy rag from the worn linoleum, and the classroom became clean. Will you go into the army and ask for the Navy? Adriana advised. Field strange plant in the form of a green stick, from the top of which leaves fan out. Your ship will always be shiny. Ethan said nothing, just looked at her. No, seriously. Where are you going? Adriana asked. Ethan replied reluctantly, mopping under the teacher's desk. Polytechnic. I guess I'll give it a try. Adriana sighed sympathetically. Polytech seemed little better than the army to her. All that creepy math, the blueprints at school, she treated the exact sciences as punishment. They were the hardest for her, and here she was volunteering. Are you really interested in all this? She made a gesture as if drawing. There's not much I want to do. There's also such a thing as real life. Ethan lifted his head and suddenly smiled at her. Adriana had never seen him smile like that in all these years. It was short, but bright and trusting. And she also remembered that he went first in his biology class and all the animals. From the living corner, he was adored by parrots, sat at his outstretched hand for long periods of time. And Bella and the rat almost did not climb to kiss. He put them on his shoulders, several at a time, when he cleaned the cages. But you couldn't study biology in their town. You had to leave. And Ethan probably couldn't do that with his sick mother. Polytechnic Institute, 2 bus stops away, and the competition was low year after year. Where do you think you're going? Ethan asked. I don't know yet. With Ethan, everything is still hanging in the balance. She suddenly wanted to tell Ethan how scared she was, whether everything would work out, but he was the one she couldn't tell. So she held back, and he sensed something, standing beside her, hesitating. Finally, he stepped back. When the cleaning was done, they locked the classroom and went out onto the school porch. A warm breeze blew into their faces. The gardens were already matchmaking before school. And then Ethan asked you that way. I have to go to the nature store too. The fish had finished feeding. Then their paths diverged. Ethan ran to the other side of the street, but after walking a few steps, Adriana looked back and saw that he was already up on the porch of the store, nature standing there looking after her. Lunch was coming to an end. When Michael was a child, it was a never-ending dreary ceremony. Time after time, he had to listen to his mother's remarks about how to sit, how to keep his back, what fork to take. And the most painful was the feeling of hunger, which did not go away even after the meal. Christina considered gluttony a great vice. It's suicide to poison yourself with an extra bite, she repeated. And the plates usually had something symbolic on them. Then Michael became accustomed to the regimen and no longer noticed it, and was content with little. So what have you decided about London? Asked Rick about his lips with a napkin. If you are determined not to leave, maybe apply to our university. Dear parents, the family was used to this slight irony and accepted it naturally. Michael pushed his plate away. Let me make a counter-proposal. I will enroll in any institute of your choice and graduate in good faith. The parents looked at each other. So you didn't believe in any of them? And your astronomy? And what do you demand in return? Asked Rick. He knew that his son's word was unbreakable. And now, if he gives them a chance, it is possible to make for him the most important step that will determine the future of Michael. He would put his son through law school and then take him into the ministry afterward. So clarified Rick. In his heart, he was ready to make all possible concessions for the sake of the main thing. Michael held his breath. Right after graduation, I'm getting married. Christina dropped his hands powerlessly in his lap. I don't even know what's worse, she said. Wait, gestured Rick to stop her and clarified businesslike, we know this girl. It's unlikely she hasn't come to us. And how long have you known her? The last words the mother emphasized the second year. But you're not getting married because she's a face. Has she distorted it? No, mother, she's not pregnant. I would also like to add that no one is blackmailing me. Yesterday when I proposed to Adriana, she was even more surprised than you are now. So you've already made up your mind. What if Dad and I had? Mom, let's not play out the drama of parental despotism. An autocrat. And hair. Do you remember how old I am? Do you know that I can make up my own mind? You still want drama. Go ahead. Disinherit me. I agree. Christina sighed and looked at her husband. Rick, as always, was reserved. He didn't like to show emotion. And the question sounded specific. Can you tell us in a nutshell what your chosen one is? Michael shrugged his shoulders. Her name is Adriana. She's the same age as me, and she's graduating from high school. And her parents. Do you want to know if she's our type? No. Mother's a teacher, divorced. I don't know the father, if there ever was one. Christina, without raising her eyes, nodded her knife on her plate. Katja. Rick stopped her. We'll talk to you in private. And you're him, Michael. Tell your Adriana we're inviting her to dinner. We should get to know each other better anyway. Dinner was served in the small dining room, where the family usually gathered. Michael saw that as a good sign. Only the immediate family was invited here. But maybe Mom just decided that there was no need to parade some girl from the back alley. The parents were already seated at the table. Rick stood up to greet Adriana and pulled out a chair for her. He took a seat at the head of the table. Christina at his right hand and Adriana now at his left. Michael sat down next to her. Adriana kept her cool, at least outwardly. Barely had she poured her half cup of soup as Adriana nodded. Enough. Was she hungry? Michael didn't know. But she ate without showing appetite, just like her mother. So I gather. Are you graduating from Adriana High School this year too? Rick asked. And then where? Probably on the mobile path. Russian and literature. Yes, we have to do that. Rick nodded. The Russian language is in a terrible state nowadays. I myself did not abuse it at school, as they say. 4s mostly, no more than that. Komsomol work took all my strength. But what's being done now? It's impossible to convey. You know, I have to look through a lot of documents and sign them. So believe me, I'm horrified. My young people are ministerial beauties, all with higher education, or even two. They'd write something that would make you laugh, or call an interpreter to explain it to an old man. What were they trying to say? At one time the country rose for money, decided that the humanities do not earn much. And now it's cleaning up the mess. Oh, dear mother. Rick put his hand to his cheek. Michael felt that his father's friendly tone touched Adriana. She obviously did not expect such attention, and answered him with an uncertain smile, in which sincerity was already evident. You must read a lot, Adriana. Michael, what does she like? That's rare these days. It's nice to meet such an attentive gaze. How are you looking at me now? It's the look of a man who reads. She put a big plate in front of Rick. The roast must have been cooked separately for him, because everyone else was served much smaller plates of stew and vegetables, herbs, unknown fish. Not a serious meal in my household, Rick said. Perhaps, Adriana, you can keep me company later. We'll eat humanely. Or are you an advocate of healthy eating too? A slight sound escaped her lips. Christina reminded her of being used to judging her ballet girls in terms of classical figure or marriage slouchy. She didn't like the look of Faith at all, which promised a heavy womanhood in the future. Didn't you take dancing lessons yourself, Adriana? It was Rick again. I did, Adriana nodded. In the 7th grade, an aunt came to us and started to persuade us. Promised they'd teach modern dance to the sick. She got all the girls excited. But when we came to her at the Palace of Culture, it turned out that she probably went to all the schools and the girls gathered. There was nowhere to stand. So this madam organized the selection, and you didn't pass it. That's not true. I was almost the first one out. I had to dance. You know, the 1, 2, 3 waltz across the room. I got confused about which foot to start on, and the lady yelled right away, "It's pretty familiar. Christina," nodded Rick. Then we were gathered, all the enrollees, and comforted because some of the girls were crying. We were advised to do something else. I was sent to the puppet theater to work with puppets. I needed those puppets. What are you interested in now? Adriana shrugged her shoulders slightly. Art. Yes, I still love it. But it's a bit of a drive. The Philharmonic Theater is across town. And then there's grad school. That leaves books. I read a lot. You're not interested in politics. It's not my thing. Well, thank God. It's a man's business, after all. Rick's up. Well, darlings, let me say goodbye. I'm due at the ministry at 3. Passing Christina, he touched her hair with his lips and whispered, "Quite a nice girl." And there was no need to worry beforehand. But Christina sat tense, silent, and he never knew what she thought about it. The prom was over. No other way to put it. The school cafeteria thing didn't work. Rich parents insisted we should rent a floating restaurant, the one by the riverport. Of course, the grown-ups promised there wouldn't be much alcohol, just a little bit, but everything went as it went. And by 1:00 a.m., I ran into Lisa's class. We have to get Betty or she'll fall in the water. Betty, the tallest girl in the class, was so drunk she couldn't think straight. At first she sat on the steep metal steps of the gangway and resented why the damn steamboat was rocking so much, even though the floating restaurant was deliberately offshore. Then Betty slipped down the gangway. By some miracle, she didn't break her leg. As we know, the drunk is lucky. Now Betty was standing over the side and throwing up. Eventually, Betty was laid on a bench on the upper deck by the class, covered her with her cloak, and Betty fell asleep. The three of them sat in a corner of the room, Adriana, Kelly, and Ethan. Adriana didn't want to wear her royal blue dress. It would have drawn stares. I had to explain where it came from. And Adriana was afraid to jinx it just yet. Didn't even mention Michael. And the dress she was wearing was that simple cast-on sheath that her mother had dreamed of. I sewed a light-colored suit and went out into the world for the first time. That's it. From now on, we'll only see each other at get-togethers, Kelly said. Slow music started playing. Ethan took a sip and asked Wind if he would go dancing with me. I misfired behind, nodded, and prepared to kick Adriana under the table with my foot. Had she refused, but Adriana rose with a smile. Only now she realized Ethan was in love with her and wanted to give him a happy moment. She didn't just put her hands on his shoulders, but snuggled up to him. And it made her feel good to feel his strength, his gentle hands rough against the warmth of his jacket. She reached her cheek to his shoulder, sighed involuntarily at his scent, and felt herself breathless with excitement. And she was so at ease. She pulled away and smiled affectionately back at him. At his look, at that tense question. "You'll be all right," she said, and hugged him again with the movement of the dance. And it was a farewell hug. The wedding was played at the campground. It began with a question from Christina. EP, as mentally dubbed the future mother-in-law Adriana Liss, who became a magazine and pointed to the wedding dress. "Adriana, do you want this lace craze?" Adriana shook her head. Not at all. She almost didn't believe there would be a wedding, and was tiptoeing around the issue, trying not to attract the attention of fate. She and Michael had agreed to drop by the registry office on a weekday to get married, as long as nothing went wrong, and everyone got off their backs. The campgrounds are on the shore of a lake, and there are several other lakes nearby. So everyone sat at the table and dispersed. Michael saw his mother and father sitting on the shore in a deck chair. And Christina's face is peaceful. The mother listens to the nightingale singing. Michael did not understand how one can come to nature and turn on full power music. Nature has its own concert hall, and this every time unique melody people hear so rarely. The glitter of small waves, the sound of young leaves, the rolling grasshoppers, and never do they pour in so self-consciously as they do at this time of year. Birdsong. Good, said Christina with her eyes closed. God, it's good. Are there fish here? Rick asked. Michael laughed lightly, remembering the picture. Once his father had taken him on a business trip. Officials were meeting in a rest house near Moscow. They were discussing something. Michael didn't try to find out that they wouldn't let him into the conference room anyway. He was off wandering in the spring woods. But when Rick stuttered about fishing, the organizers of the event immediately rushed to organize everything. And within an hour, you could see this sight. Rick standing in a small pool with a straw hat on his father's head and a fishing rod in his hands. Classic fisherman. The water in the pool is up to his ankles. You can't even see the water. It's all fish. Fish in the pool poured so much that legs and hands grab all around splashes in the shimmering silver scales. Michael noticed the confident mom tears on her cheeks and, without telling his wife, approached, leaned in himself. Kathy, what's wrong? Nothing. Nothing. She wiped her eyes hastily. It's all over now. Well, Bereznoy stroked her hand with affectionate fingers. Our everything with Adriana. And not wanting to explain, she hastily turned the conversation. I'm very afraid for you. Why are you taking an airplane? I'm so afraid of flying. She always foresaw the bad. The black pessimist was talking about himself even now. Isn't it scary to take such a risk? That it's a good thing. Greece and Adriana have never been abroad, but if something happens, I'll lose everything. I have nothing left to live for. Michael's parents have one too. Don't worry, nothing will happen to us in the sky. I know that. The sky won't hurt us. Michael looked into her eyes, and though she still felt no tenderness for him, there was something in his gaze that was so understanding and compassionate. The strength of these feelings seemed out of place. Kathy smiled involuntarily at him in her years at the school. She hadn't met children like this. How clear-eyed and boyish, she thought. God forbid. No, God save him and Adriana. Kathy pushed her plate away. She wasn't good at sitting for hours. Pulling the cocktail away out of habit, ate quickly, like a person who made every minute count. Kelly's morning was getting better. I'm gonna kill that hairdresser. It's not like it's going smoothly for me, she complained. Running over to Adriana and looking in the mirror at her unfortunate hairstyle. Adriana was nervous because the lights were out in the morning and her mom couldn't iron her dress. Kelly offered her services. I stuck a screwdriver in the brush. I'm at home fixing things. And then she got electrocuted. Thank God it wasn't severe. But Kelly believed in omens and went pale. Oh, Adriana, something's gonna happen today. You're gonna get a tongue lashing. And just seeing beautiful young people, friends Michael Yakovenko amused. And soon the lens rang with her laughter. And you didn't invite Ethan? She asked, quietly. Why? I'm not a sadist, and he's not a masochist. No, you couldn't bring Ethan here and make him share in their fun. We can set the tea, serve the sweets. The waitress did not approach Christina, but Rick. She was experienced and unmistakably figured out the main person at the wedding. Rick glanced at his watch. Wow, a cab will be here for the guys in half an hour. Serve, of course. Let them at least try the cake. The cake was ordered several stories high. If it was a gangster movie, the lid would be off and a guy with a machine gun would pop out, whispered Michael. Adriana giggled, and Kelly businesslike looked at the cake and said, we'll have to take everything that the guests will not eat. Take it home. Little by little it was getting dusk, the silhouettes of trees, the stars in the sky lit up with small sparks. They waited, listening to the noises of the cab engine. The young ones were flying to Athens and traveling further in Greece. That's a good tone, the EC said. It used to be the way things were done. Church in the morning, restaurant in the evening, and then the train to the honeymoon. Don't worry, Adriana. Your mother and your friend will be delivered safely home, Rick said. I'll call you as soon as you get on the plane and when you arrive, my mom asked, and how she didn't want to hide it. But Adriana felt both her anxiety and her pain. "I will." Michael threw his jacket over his shoulders. Into the car now. She resisted, but she didn't take off her jacket. It seemed to her that she was embraced by warm hands, and a moment later a bell rang in her pocket. Adriana remembered that she hadn't picked up her cell phone all day, and the tap was still glowing blue. "A text message for the rest of her life," Ethan wrote. On the airplane, Faith had a strange feeling like they were flying to another planet. She didn't know English at all. She had learned German at school. Michael spoke English, even without an accent. Special schools and a musical ear. Plus, he traveled abroad with his parents almost every year. And now, in the kingdom state of Greece, Adriana would have to cling to him like a deaf-mute. Their independent life was beginning. Michael gave Adriana a seat by the porthole. He strapped her in himself. And she'd never been able to do that, even in the car. She'd never been able to do it. Even in the car, the belt wouldn't tighten. It wouldn't tighten. She had untalented hands. The plane started to taxi onto the runway. It's not that yet. It's slow, not scary, Adriana thought. The airplane shuddered and began to accelerate. Michael and Vera's fingers intertwined. "Are you afraid?" Michael asked. She was silent, but from her eyes glistening and wide open, he realized that she was terribly afraid. He leaned toward her. She felt his breath on her cheek. "Don't be afraid. Nothing will happen to me in the air. I know it. I can feel it. Don't be afraid to fly with me." But the airplane lifted upward, and Adriana jerked away from the porthole, pressed herself against Michael, and was no longer aware of being lifted by the unknown force of the engines, or its Michael hugging her. And they took off. Michael knew from experience that pilots gained altitude in different ways. Some lead the car as if they were climbing a mountainside, others as if they were jumping nonstop. Michael liked a continuous takeoff, and right now the car was going that way. The hour was late, and most of the passengers were trying to sleep. But Michael, like all nervous people, could not sleep on the road. He was glad he did. And believe, I didn't. Why don't we have some champagne or cognac so you don't get scared? No, I don't want to. I'm drunk enough as it is. Wait, I have a present for you. I wanted to give it to you this morning. Michael took something shiny out of his pocket and put it on her arm. Quietly, the rings quivered. Adriana did not look at it immediately, almost fearfully, expecting to see expensive stones. But when she opened her eyes, she saw the bracelet was quite simple. Copper rings, some metals, a glass, white, and a flower. "It's Adriana," bent over myopically. "I found this. I bought it at a junkyard. Look at all of Exupery's little prints." And she saw on one of the medals and displaced the figure of a boy in a long cloak. There's the rose, and the little brass lantern, and stars that laugh like Cubans, and a bronze 2-engine airplane. It will seem to you as if I were dying. But I'm not. My body is too heavy. I can't carry it. But it's like shedding an old shell. There's nothing sad about it, Michael said, humming as he always quoted memorized lines. And then he added, "You know, they found him, didn't they?" "Who?" asked Adriana, ready to cry. Everyone thought he'd been shot down by a German pilot. But recently fishermen found his bracelet. And then they found the wreckage of his plane at the bottom of the sea. But he was shot down. I think it was him who sent the car to the sea. I remember our Grinia, and for him, and for the soldiers of the GC flight, was a miracle. They thought that pilots were like birds. And then came the heavy machines with a lot of instruments. Gone was the imagination, the dream of poetry, and Exupery. He was sick. His back kept him from flying. Rumors were spread about him. Everything was so painful, so dirty, even his favorite things. Talking about him, I think he just decided to disappear. Don't cry. Better shake your hand and listen to the stars laughing. Adriana shook the brush lightly and heard a gentle, slightly audible, and the tinkling of crystal stars and tambourine. They tinkled, making contact with each other and hitting the bronze airplane, as if flying between them. They were sitting in a small tavern. That's right. How does it sound? Adriana said. I thought it was purely pirate. From the last century, anyway. A place where drunken sailors congregate. Not at all. Michael laughed. In Greece, a tavern is a commonplace. If you look in and see that the tables and chairs are simple, like in village houses, and all the furnishings are the same. That's exactly right. Greeks love them for hours. The most famous people sit here, and they come here all the time. Take a look around. Maybe there's a minister or an artist next to you. That's the kind of democracy they have. Or better yet, you have a menu and choose what you want to eat. Yeah, I'm gonna get it. Translate. Come on, Adriana asked. I can't even pronounce what it says. Here Michael poked his finger into the lines with a name like that. We just can't miss the lemon soup cat. Adriana couldn't take it anymore and laughed. I want that lemon soup cat. We're ordering cat soup. And we'll also get the variglico. This strong, sweet coffee and sun, young wine infused with smelly conifers. They sat and ate this fabulous soup, which turned out not to be of mustachioed striped at all, but rice with lemon, with juice. They ate fish fried in olive oil. In small sips they drank hot, really very sweet, and some kind of thick coffee. Before tasting something, Adriana sighed at the smell. There was nothing to compare it to. It seemed to her that the Greek gods ate exactly what they were eating now. She touched the rough yellow and green checkered curtains with her fingers, and their table stood by the window and couldn't believe it was all really happening. And from now on she and Michael would be together. The world opened up to her. And it was so simple. None of those non-young Greeks sitting next to them were surprised that she was here. She had seen nothing but the outskirts of her hometown and had no hope of seeing anything else in her life. They paid and went outside. Without conspiring, they turned and walked toward the two-story and golden-colored hotel building. Again their hands intertwined and they laughed. There's the meteor, Michael said. The cab driver, hearing the familiar word, nodded. I wondered why you chose this hot country. I only know meteorites. And this is the second place. There's no place like this on Earth. Where? A convulsive sigh, and Adriana made a hasty hand gesture. Exactly, asked the driver to stop after seeing the meteor. You still have to come to your senses. Home had always meant a lot to Faith, its protection, its warmth, its four walls and silence. No extraneous sounds, no other people's gazes. What she saw now were also homes. But God's homes create a monastery. Floating in the air, only God could. Islets of paradise for people to see how it was. Responsible rocks many 1 million years old from the creation of the world. Adriana decided for herself. Michael said that once there was a sea here with a communist bottom. As time passed and the sea receded, water, wind, and temperature changes turned its bottom into pillars of stone, as if suspended in the air. They really scorched these pillars, and the Greeks called them meteors. To the cliff tops began to climb those who sought solitude, hermits. They found caves, or just shallow cracks in the rocks here to pass the nights, or maybe days. They probably slept during the day and prayed at night, when the stars are as close as if they were touching their heads. When you are alone with the sky, what shocked Adriana the most was the monastery, street barbers. It seemed to her the most flying, unweighted finger pointing them into the sky. They passed over a narrow bridge. Adriana tried not to look down. There were chasms to the right and left, and small, cozier courtyards inside the monastery, where ancient walls and steps neighbor with flowery towns. Everywhere, it is a special morning frequency, which happens only in Orthodox monasteries and temples. In the center of the courtyard, beds in the shape of a cross, densely planted with flowers. You look, the cross is blooming. Later they will buy souvenirs, and what not only will not pick up relatives and friends, bags of herbs and bottles, with fragrant oils, grounded coffee, and Greek wine in empty bottles, painted clay vases, scarves, beads, statuettes, but about themselves will bring only 2 tarot crosses. Michael will choose the golden carved one. It is permeated with air. Adriana will choose a golden one with birch inclusions, as if with splashes of sky. And it will turn out that they didn't choose them for themselves, but for each other. And they would exchange crosses, never to take them off again. They spent the rest of their vacation in Crete at Nicholas in the Gulf of Mirabella. There was quite a bit of Byzantine antiquity here too. The Church of St. Nicholas with frescoes from that era. St. Nicholas. Legend has it that Athena herself took a bath in this lake. I'll never forget it, said Adriana. Let's travel a lot with you. Every year we'll go to some new country. I also want to go to Norway. The fjords, Andersen green ice, and old trolls. The sea was calm, and the silver moon globe hung just above the water. Adriana couldn't stand it and followed the moon's path straight into the deep. A few moments later, Michael caught up with her. As the water began to nod their hips, they stopped. They stood in the moon's glow. Now, that's not going to happen anymore, Michael said quietly. What? Those seas? It will all be a thing of the past. An ocean of storms, a sea of rain, a sea of clarity, a sea of calm, a sea of fertility, and a sea of crisis. He was listing names, almost sang. They're right, my loved ones. They're right. You can't live in 2 worlds. Did you know that the moon's seas and the Earth's oceans are alike? They're the same depth. They have basalt bottoms, but our oceans are alive. Those worlds only come to life in the imagination. Enough. One must become a citizen of the Earth. He laughed softly, but it was a strange laugh. What are you up to? Anxious? Adriana asked. You won't be able to do without all this. Are you going to die with you? He laughed and drew her to him. Never with you. We are exiled, thought Adriana. After returning from Greece, they moved in with Michael, taking 2 rooms in the left wing of the house, the furthest away from everyone, with a private garden. Adriana was afraid to go out to dinner, too restrained. She felt herself at a table with a small tablecloth and numerous devices, where the servants served her. And most importantly, Michael's parents were nearby. And yet she walked. Rick was not always present at the table. Christina was emphatically silent. And if she spoke, it was to Michael. There was an unforgivable resentment in his voice. She wouldn't let the young people forget their guilt. They breathed it. Michael received a gold medal at graduation and entered the university law school in the summer. Adriana, on the other hand, didn't get a few points in PhilFac. Where else to go? There was nothing else to do. Please be with me, Michael. Please be with me, so that you're always here for me. Stupid. Kathy had a hard time holding back. Idiot. You realize you're going to be nothing. This family will throw you out sooner or later. And then what? A mop in your hands and scrub the floors. You're totally dependent on them. But Adriana felt that Michael had a string tugging at his heartstrings, and she knew that she was the one who couldn't hurt him. She couldn't contradict him. You have to do what he wants, what's best for him. So where did your friend go? I asked Michael when they were alone together. She persisted in not naming Adriana and her wife. Does she have to? Michael asked. Behind the softness of his tone, she sensed the challenge and accepted it. So her ability to do anything was not enough. Or did she just decide to live like a rich lady? She knows you won't mind. You'll put her up. And lying in bed all day painting her nails is certainly easier than going out and studying. She heard Michael's labored sigh. There were suppressed, unspoken words in it. Then the sun turned abruptly and left the room. Adriana tried not to show her face anywhere but her part of the house. It was getting dark. Michael and Adriana sit by the fireplace with no lights on. The wood has already burned through and the room is warm. Michael stirs the coals. They drink as rubies shimmer with fire. They don't give up. They don't crumble to ash. They live. Adriana pours wine into heavy crystal glasses and sits down on the rug next to her husband. The wine, 2 is ruby-colored and smells of grapes. They say nothing. They stare at the catching up embers. Adriana no longer asks Michael to tell stories. Now she tries to talk herself, to distract him from his sad reverie, perhaps the reason for his longing. It's just that late fall is raining. Next summer, you and I will go to India, she says. Michael's eyes travel down her arm. Should we? He asks. Do I still respond weakly? Not quite yet. It's hot. Someone told me that when you step off the airplane, it's like being in a frying pan. It's hard to breathe in the heat. I didn't know why I wanted to go there, says Adriana, resting her chin on her palms. I heard it too. Poverty, slums, filth. And then I heard someone else's story too. I don't remember, but no. I remember my mom's student. He decided to search for the meaning of life. Can you imagine? He was just an ordinary boy, chubby and square. I called him by his soul. He was a teacher. My mom told me about his internship with her. The kids wouldn't listen to him. They'd run after him in class. My mom kept them busy. And this man began to search for the meaning of life, read various philosophical works. He went to India and came back completely different. And he came back completely different. And they say there was a man like him. Shocked, he told me. He and his friends were traveling by car. And at some point the road divides into 3 identical paths. Then they learned that one leads to a waterfall, another to a village, and the third to a temple. But at that moment they had no one to ask where to go. They see an old man in a white robe coming. The thief had no time to open his mouth. The old man raised his staff and showed them the way, the path to the temple. They went there without a word, without a question. There they read minds, there they feel people, there even doctors determine the disease by the policy, by the heartbeat. Let's go, Michael said and smiled. He hadn't smiled in a long time. Right? Well, let the pan stand. I also read that the shops there sell stones with stars inside. That's what they're called. Stars, and sapphire ruby points a beam of light at the stone, and a star lights up in it. Michael leaned slightly on Faith's shoulder and stood up, placing the glass on the table. Don't wait up for me when you go to sleep tonight. I've got a lot of laws to deal with. He nodded at the table where the textbooks were divided up. This is how Adriana remembered those evenings. She lies there with her face turned toward the table lamp, and feeling the warmth from it, she opens her eyes. She sees Michael bent over his books, his eyebrows shifted, and a thin, deep wrinkle crosses his forehead. Adriana, it seems that he is walking in the desert against the wind, and it is painful to him, this effort. In the last year of Michael's studies, he was interning at his father's place, driving up in the morning to the government building, which in every regional center is called the White House. Michael was not in awe of his skyrocketing career, and even less did he feel reverence for the ranks. The governor had only recently been appointed and was in the process of selecting his cronies. As Adriana Michael explained, he felt like he was in a theater. All this bureaucratic fraternity smugly unashamed of anyone in the world. How dedicated they looked when he was scolding his subordinates. But what was behind it? Later, Michael heard the head of the press service say, "Good thing I got my paycheck. Holy shit. I wouldn't have lasted a day for the idea." But she was the one who liked to spread it thin the most. After her whipping, the girls' fingers were shaking, and the room smelled of Corvalol. They were afraid of losing such a lucrative job, but they didn't want to be considered human. And the humanity that had not yet died in them protested. Older officials had learned not to take anything personally. Michael had been present at meetings where fluff and feathers flew, but the boardroom door slammed, and the officials went back to being nonchalant and casual, as if nothing had happened. Michael was getting lost in the endless intrigue. The other day, he stood at the window with white-haired Cindy, one of those few girls you can talk to. Cindy was married and did not make a pass at him like the other ladies to whom Michael's marital status meant nothing. It was assumed that with his looks, cheating on his wife was a matter of course. "I've just been appointed head of the department," Cindy shared bitterly. So I complained about how hard it was to settle in. So he sat down with the same feet to the boss and said that he was ready to replace me. Cindy confessed that the position wasn't hers. She wants to leave. She can't cope. Before teasing, she and summarized in general, enema, and know your place. Everybody's sucking up to everybody, or feel that they're about to be deposed. Try to get as fast as possible. All this was covered with lofty phrases about the people's good, and they were unrealistically polite. These people, Michael heard them talking all the time. Let's put it in a streamlined way. It seemed to him, approached the officials with a dog, a bloodhound. It wouldn't have honored the human scent coming from them. Michael was getting stuffy. The White House had a beautiful dining room with a conservatory. Everything in the world was served there, nothing more to be desired. Especially good were the cakes, the bird's milk. But Michael would call Adriana and get her to go out for lunch. While waiting for his wife, he paced back and forth in the small park in front of the White House. There were fountains running here. Tight jets made the water boil, stirred to the bottom. Michael stopped, putting his hands behind his back. Tall, thin, it was easier for him to breathe. A child in a red jumpsuit leaned over the edge, looked at the foamy white water, and asked Daddy, "Are there fish in here?" Michael could see Adriana from afar. Here she was jumping off the streetcar, rushing towards him, the hem of her golden-colored cloak flying away. Like you. Their voices merged, and longing gave way to laughter. Next door, there was an alternate. They stood in line with everyone else. Watching the dumplings boil, the cook stirred them for the pilgrims in a huge pot. Then she would pick up a colander. Already, the line was beginning to move quickly. She and Adriana already had their own table in a corner. Faith's hand warmed Michael's hair. The pain lodged in the right sand receded under the gentle movements, her fingers from the dumplings and steam rising. "Where do you want to go tonight?" Adriana asks, and quickly adds, "Let's just go for a walk." Walking in this weather. She nods. She loves the weather and life in general. He has less and less of that love of life. He remembers that he felt her as a child and himself as an adult. How silly is that? She is the one who takes his hand and leads him in the city park of Clueless. November. Only a few dark green bushes still held their shape after being trimmed and stood like abandoned fairy tale animals. The rest of the trees and shrubs had long since flown over the bare, wet park. Beyond the granite parapet, the Volga beach, not a single person. A fine rain dripped cold water. They walked, holding hands. Their fingers were cold too, and only somewhere in the depths of their palms touched, and there was still warmth. Adriana again. With no musical or artistic talent, I began to describe what was around me. But what else was there to manage to notice? Look, there are leaves left on that tree over there. Look closely. They're completely silver. And how does the light of the streetlights reflect in the wet asphalt? The ground is on fire. Red and blue gold. We walk on the solid, and the glow crushes and shimmers the colors. Michael put his palm on his chest under his jacket. "No, it's stuffy," and asked me to keep it down. Once, when they were walking, it snowed, falling in large flakes at once. It made the world seem childlike and fairy tale-like. It was so beautiful that they looked at each other and laughed. "Up, up, up, up. Look up," Adriana shouted. They threw their heads back and watched as countless snowflakes were born out of the unknown darkness, and they flew at them endlessly. Michael squeezed Adriana in his arms, and they all looked up, and their heads were spinning, because the whirlwind was not just descending on them, it was taking them with it. They didn't feel like they were standing on the ground anymore. Adriana sat in the barbershop. She always went to this little barbershop, where there were only two masters, and there were almost never any queues. And then there was still time left until the evening. Adriana decided to run into the cafe next door. Then it would be possible to avoid a formal dinner. At home, she took a cup of coffee and a piece of apple pie smelling of cinnamon. The filling was Kissling, probably Antonovka. Barely had time to settle in at the table and shake off the drops of standing snow from the furry lapel in my jacket as I slipped into my bags. Lightly vibrating her cell phone, she began rummaging through the compartments, never able to immediately find it. Adriana. She barely recognized the voice. Kelly. It wasn't her voice. Thin, childish, pathetic. What's wrong? Adriana assumed anything. The mother-in-law lost money. The pipes burst at home, and there was a flood. Eventually, Christina was fired for some theatrical intrigue, but she was told by the impossible, unthinkable Adriana. Michael was gone. Michael was gone. Adriana didn't realize she could grab her face, and in a voice as thin as Kelly's, Kelly, scream, 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 not realizing that the heads of everyone sitting in the cafe had turned toward her, that she had dropped her phone, and it was under her feet falling apart. She screamed, clenching her cheeks with her palms. No. In a flurry, she knotted her hands and screamed no again. And then her hands were suddenly numb. Her heart is pounding and her hands are not us. Adriana can't lean on the table to stand up, and she can't cry because she can't breathe. Breathing is all confused and convulsive. Coffee is dripping all over the table. This Adriana does reach out a dead hand to grab the edge of the table and stand up, knocking over the cup. And next came the memory lapse. The house was surrounded by other people's cars. Christina, standing dry in the hallway, a certain straight woman in a black dress, arms cordoned off. It's not Michael in mourning yet, it's her favorite dress. Then they're in some very small room. It's unbearably stuffy. Adriana can't sit down. She circles the room. There she sits. Kelly. Her face is gone. What's wrong? Finally, Adriana asks. He drove up to the institute. A fellow student saw it. A car was coming. Not sure if he was drunk, but still he parked it so as not to hit anyone. When they ran up, he was lying on the steering wheel, dropped his face on his hand. They say he was very white. They say it wasn't clear if he was breathing or not. The ambulance came quickly, about 10 minutes. They tried to do something, but they said it was too late, too late. They took him away without his life. Yes, but what's wrong with him? But from what? What's the heart from? Adriana, it's my fault. I'm the one who grabbed my head. I went and asked for a waiver so your family wouldn't exist, and now she's gone. Lightning struck. Adriana looked at the clock and saw that the time was approaching 6:00 p.m. This was the time Michael always came in. Adriana realized she was waiting for him. He must come. Adriana realized that she was going crazy. She must be taken away. She's insane, said Christina to one of the ladies she knew. Adriana sat by the coffin. The coffin was in the largest room of the house, the one she and Michael had recently called the sick room. Sitting there were those closest to Rick, Christina, a few elderly men and women. As it turned out, they're relatives, but there were a lot of people in the room. Adriana could feel their presence, their breathing, but saw no one except Michael. Michael's face was indeed very white now. To say he was just sleeping. But he didn't look like sleeping. There was a distinct stamp of death on the huddled features. It was impossible to imagine him getting up and speaking. All of him was already there in the unknown. Belonged to him. Voices came in waves. Such a boy. Pity his parents had him all to themselves. Such a pity. What about the heart? Is it getting younger these days? Heart attacks, strokes, and there was no warning. A young wife will survive. But the mother. And he has no children left. Adriana raised her head and grinned crookedly. Another phrase nailed her. And the wife. Look, no tears. A few days later, as she was packing up her things in her and Michael's former. And now in no one's room she heard a radio a woman's voice saying, "The land is empty without you." It was only then that she was able to drop her head on the table and sob. So the body was in denial. And she knows why he left. He was strangled by the stranglehold of everyday life. He condemned himself to it. He couldn't take it for her. and she realized it so late. Adriana left the room, hanging on her shoulder the same backpack that had accompanied her to Meteor an eternity ago. What was she to take with her? But she knew everything she needed. She did carry. Rick not being at work somehow mattered little in their lives. Rick, he was almost never there. Showed up at the table, smiled, said nice things, and he was the one who chose the road to Michael's demise. Didn't feel sorry for his son, didn't let him go, and seemingly unbending. Turned out to be more merciful. How could she not want to see her son on stage? She let him go. Go on, you'd better dance. Christina stood at the foot of the stairs, knew Adriana was coming down, but had not yet heard her footsteps. She was just a girl. Flowers, rock pants, hair in a ponytail. Turned away, stood there, but when she lifted her face, Adriana was struck by how her eyes were not just old, but ancient, all-leading ones that no longer feared anything. And there was in those eyes something of the look Michael was leaving. Asked her with a chesty whisper, though it was obvious. Adriana nodded. You're going to your mom's, aren't you? I said you'll be taken. Adriana had said right after the funeral, when she was able to speak coherently, that she was going back to her mother's house, and let them talk to her for God's sake, not about her inheritance, but about what she was entitled to. I don't even want to know. I will live as I have always lived, she said then and now, seeing her former daughter-in-law off. Kelly couldn't help herself. She said almost against her will. Try to get over it. Let it go. You'll be happy when you meet someone else. Faith's lips quivered. Kelly didn't realize the quick spasm running down her face. Wait. Here Christina walked quickly to the dressing table, opened the jewelry box, sifted just as quickly with her slender fingers gawked or jewelry from one to another. About the ring heavy, expensive. A white stone from a crisis sharp, probably a diamond. Be that as it may, pray for Michael. Don't. Adriana shook her head, pulled it away. Adriana, here is his cross always with me. Don't need anything else. And for the way the gaze greedily pulled Kelly at what she had chosen, held in her son's hands, for feeling the same fierce longing in her as she did in herself. Adriana had forgiven her for a lot of things. Nothing had changed in Adriana's small room. It hums with different voices, a car tractor parked under the window. The narrow bed is bedded on an old quilt pink still grandmother's. In the dark water of the aquarium swim goldfish. My you are good Adriana lies on the bed and Mom strokes her face. Her hair comes to life. Mom, I'm pregnant, aren't I? Colorless, Adriana says. Jesus Christ. Mom raises her hand. You're lying to me now. Adriana shook her head. I've been to the doctor 12 weeks, and they know. You didn't need to explain who they were. Michael's family. No, and God forbid they should find out. But why? Don't you understand? Because that would mean losing the last thing I have. They had nothing left either. Michael was alone. So they're gonna take me and lock me in the house, and I can't be there a minute longer. I can't see it all. And then they'll take my son. He won't be mine. They'll raise him their way. They'll decide everything for him. They'll kill them. Like Michael did. The mother is silent. Isn't that what you wanted? Adriana asked, hearing her thoughts. You always told me we'd grow up, but you can't imagine what I can't imagine. Adriana sat up on the bed, her face swollen. You see, if I just mention it to them, do you know what could be? Mother asked. They might not believe it's his kid. They'll say you need money. You what? I know they didn't love me, but how could they think that? You don't know people. Maybe they'll do the opposite, help you raise you. That would be good, because no one will come to your maternity hospital but me. There will be days when this child may have nothing to feed, nothing to wear. We have to leave, Adriana said, without listening to her. If anyone tells them, if they meet me in the street with the baby, I won't survive if they take it away. We have to leave. Where you want to go, I don't know, but I imagine if I'm walking with my son somewhere and I run into Kelly, not just leave, And you would come with me. Where would I go without you? Just answered Mom. Kelly came to the rescue. Kelly, it turns out, had a relative in Gelendzhik who dealt in real estate. He found housing for vacationers, selected options for those wishing to move. He responded to the call immediately and said that within a week or two he would be able to offer them something. But the case was delayed, mainly because of them to prepare the documents and find buyers for their apartment overlooking the dump. It wasn't that easy. Finally, things were working out. They were selling the apartment cheap, but the one that Kelly's sibling had picked up. Kelly's sibling had enough money. Kelly was helping to set up. She was very worried about Adriana hurting herself, and she was small and fragile. She took heavy knots, moved things around. Kelly's dream came true. She graduated from medical school with a red diploma and worked in a sanatorium Sosnovyy Bor. She did physical therapy with the vacationers. She hadn't changed at all. Her pink baby face was still fresh. Kelly was like a memory of childhood, of that time when it is always easy on the soul. I'll come and visit you, and you'll be sure to ask me to be your godparent. Where is Ethan? Adriana asked. I haven't seen him for a long time. How did things work out for him? You don't know. And felt me from the invisible barrier, quickly looking for words to say coherently, to believe. Ethan failed. Then I went to the institute and got drafted into the army. And Adriana was up so fast that I didn't have time to prove my obstacle. And somewhere in Chechnya. And since then, Adriana, I really don't know anything. Adriana, don't cry. It's not good for you. Please, Adriana. Mom bloomed instead of a hive of high-rises, a stone house with a big garden. Mommy fries fish. She puts a huge pan on the table with chunks of flounder crispy crusts on her cheeks, and she's so animated in movement and speech it's like she's lost 20 years. Finally, the hour came. The hospital was close by in this small town, and they didn't call an ambulance. They walked. And when Adriana knocked on the emergency room door, and as soon as the sun came up, a boy was born. He cried softly, as if he hadn't cried at all. He was talking, soothing his mother in his own voice. I can feel her fear for him. That mommy didn't scream at all, the midwife said, gray and bossy. That's the way we'd all have a baby. He's a good-looking boy, too. It's rare to see such a handsome one. He's a prince. I heard your husband died. He left. Adriana wanted to answer, because for her it was like that. Michael had gone to his worlds, and no one else could prevent him. But it was easier to nod than to explain it all. Look, don't name it after him then. The midwife said, it's bad luck for the child to have a happy fate. Picking up another name for him, Adriana took her eyes away, staring. There was a full moon out the window now. The Bay of Rainbows. She repeated Ocean of Storms, but through these names she saw the lifelessness of the lunar landscapes. She decided to name her son Sam, and Mom was already asking in her notes, how is our Sam? Mom was the only one who came to see Adriana. Colorful balloons tied to the fence, Kelly and the dads going into the trees with binoculars. None of this was for her and her son. Despite the best efforts of his mother and grandmother, Sam was growing up, weak and almost ceaselessly sick. There was no childhood illness that would pass him by. Maybe another mother would have taken it more calmly and waved goodbye to outgrow it. But Adriana lived in constant fear, frozen. Would the last thing Michael had left be taken from her? Adriana, you're crazy. You bastard, look at yourself in the mirror. What have you become like? Kathy was angry. You don't look like a shadow in the mirror anymore. Adriana had really lost a lot of weight. There were blue shadows under her eyes. She forgot to eat because she was tired and didn't want to. She has snickered over these months obediently, uncomplainingly, like an automaton doing her homework. Mom would stand on the threshold of the bathroom, watching, shaking her head at the laundry grinder, a decrepit machine. Adriana bent over the tub. Sharp elbows snicker and puffs of steam. Believe wonders at Sam's voice. She fucks off the hand phone running to see if the baby is calling her. She wanted to hold her son's hand all the time. But when Sam turned a year old, she had to go to work. There was a job as a clerk in a bookstore, and Adriana was hired, although she had no experience, but she was diligently unrequited, even if one of the customers was cranky or rude. In addition, she read a lot and could suggest something, showed the shelf where the right books stood. She paid attention to the novelties. The salary was small, but at least it was regular money. Kathy retired and now sat with her grandson. Sam grew up not a garden boy in the mornings when young mothers walked by their house with all the children waddling obediently behind their backs. Sam sat on the table and gazed at this picture out the window. He had a look of sympathy written on his face, and his grandmother was tying his shoelaces, skinny and pale, with a perpetually hung throat. Was he so much like Michael in features and appearance that it made your heart ache? Grandma used to make him semolina, but he didn't want it. It was depressing to eat. He moved his spoon around the plate and wrinkled his nose at the smell of hot milk. Adriana took specially prepared nuts and raisins and began to lay out a simple mosaic of nutty bunnies with raisins on the porridge. Son, Sam would take up the spoon until he awakened from his fantasy, and he was bored with everything. Their neighbor was Miranda, a corner, ugly girl of about 27, plasterer on the construction site with her own hands over the dilapidated house, only for the hardest jobs they called men. Two Alkas, who quickly dragged something to her, broke off the pricks at night to sit at the table as soon as possible. Miranda made herself cozy to make everything like people. She came over, consulted. What wallpaper to choose, paint. She was used to everyone being interested. She couldn't understand Adriana's indifference to everyday life. Yes, mother, do you even live like a refugee? She says, looking around. And the shabby furniture and the owner's meager closet. Adriana shrugged weakly. But Miranda was a kind soul. She carried something to treat. A bucket of apples, a plate. Blinov eagerly played with Sam. Miranda was eager to get married. Every man who paid attention to her, she was ready to wash his feet and drink water. She'd cry on his shoulder. When another romance went sour, you've been without a man and nothing. She'd tell Miranda to blow her nose loudly. And I'll have a baby somehow, like me. I don't have to. One time, Miranda came running in excitement, and I met him. You have no idea who he is. Well, who is he? Adriana asked with an involuntary smile, wiping the plates. He works with dolphins. We went to the dolphinarium yesterday with the girls. It turned out that yesterday they were walking along the promenade in a small group, and just then they called for a performance. That's how it happens. For 100 years you live in the city and do not notice that you have dolphins in your neighborhood, and the girls are performing so beautifully. Their uniforms are like military pianists, and the dolphins obey them, jump through the hoop, and do all sorts of things. And then in the echelon, even from the last row, Miranda saw that the man was tall and slender. Such a face, and what his dolphins were doing, except that they didn't talk. They understood him half a word. And when after the show people were offered to take pictures with the flash operas, Miranda hurried downstairs, one of the first people to be let into the pool one by one. When her turn came, Miranda was able to get a glimpse of his god dolphins. There you have to rinse your hands with seawater so the dolphin doesn't get sick, or something doesn't get infected from people. And there he is standing dolphin. What a dolphin this guy is standing. And when he took my hand, you know, there's men like that. They just touch you, and it's over. And how did that end? You met him at Adriana. That was fun. Well, I said I liked it so much. I'll come back tomorrow. He said, come. By the way, you shouldn't take me to the bench. It's fun. After Miranda left, Adriana got to thinking. She read dolphins, curing people's children. Why not? At least try to negotiate. Pay her to let her socialize with this marine wonder. Maybe it would help. She went to the dolphinarium in the morning when there was no show. Timidly, she pushed the iron gate, painted blue. The first person she encountered was a girl in shorts or a scarlet t-shirt, blonde hair tied carelessly at the back of her head. The girl was carrying a bucket of fish, and she looked sternly at Adriana. Probably sick of vacationers trying to get their way with their pets, the story about the sick boy had softened her somewhat. "Come over there and talk." She pointed to the edge of the big pool. "See, there's a man sitting over there, if he'll let you." "We've never had one of those before." Adriana approached silently. The man sat with his back to her. He was wearing a black suit. He was looking through a file folder. All she could see was the back of his head. Blonde. Excuse me," she called out. He turned around. For a while they stared at each other. He saw a woman not young, but a heavy-set figure, hair, short waves. "You ask." A deep crease between her eyebrows. The dress below the knees is very plainly made. You can see that long ago waved her hand at the fashion of a puffy shawl on her shoulders, bathed in it from the sea. The breeze is fresh. Then something changed in his face, and he recognized Adriana. Was she uncertain? Asked Ethan. She too was not immediately able to recognize in this man in whom nothing of the boyishness of her classmate remained, the other quite different. The stare was stark and even heavy in his shoulders, and more gray in his hair than she had in one movement. He stood looking at her and remained silent. "Did you come to me?" Finally, he asked. "Did you find me?" She shook her head. "Kelly, she told me a long time ago that you were dead." He touched his temple, covered his eyes. So all these years she'd thought of him as dead. Where did that fool Williams come from? "Did she tell you about Chechnya?" "I just got shot." "It's a common thing. I was in the hospital for a long time, almost a year. My mother left everything. She came to nurse me back to health. She's waddling around with a stick. And then we moved here. It's the right climate. And I found some relatives. And you," he corrected himself. "You and Michael vacation here. Why do you need me?" "I buried Michael," she said simply. "And my son is sick. They say dolphins can heal." "They can." For a few minutes, he looked away. She tried to catch his gaze, whether he would allow it or deny it. She thought he was hesitating, and he just couldn't manage his face. But when he turned back to her again, his expression was calm. "What are we talking about?" "Bring her in," he said. "Even probably will help. Maybe you too, because you don't look so good either." And she was silent, and for the first time in a long time she spoke sincerely. "No, Ethan, I haven't wanted to live for a long time. I'd like to raise Sam somehow," he answered. "Not at once. We used to think differently," he said. "When someone died, it was like being on an airplane. I'd see a paratrooper being dropped. One went in, the other got a tap on the shoulder. 'Are you next?' None of us are staying here. We're all next. So live those 3 seconds like a human being." And he added, "Wait, you're coming with me now." She got her file back with a bucket full of fish and beckoned her, brought her to the edge of the pool. "Come on, stand over here." Adriana saw there in the depths vertically stands a dolphin and looks at her from his dolphin, its blue dimension. "Hold out your hand." "That's it." Ethan took her hand. She felt the rough and hardness of his palm. A moment later, Dolphin leaped into the air, and she felt the instant touch of his nose. She ought look, but that's gentler than a horse's lips. "That's a good for you, Barney. That's a good one." Ethan crouched at the edge of the pool with a fish in his hands. The dolphin poked its head out, and it looked like a baby. It had a completely childish smile. She smiled back. They stood against each other, a sturdy floor and gray-haired man, and a small, slender boy. "Hello," Ethan said. "Hello," tilted his head to get a better look at the person he was talking to. Sam replied politely. They studied each other. Ethan saw in the boy's eyes of faith to an inquisitive desire to understand each. The same pity. This little boy seemed to be looking at him with compassion too. What frightened him? the scar on his face. He was lucky in that fight. How many were killed? He realized then how easy it was to die. Suddenly, the fierce machine gun bursts from the right. You turn your head and see that your comrades are already there, a bloody stain on their chests. And the eyes are calm, not from fear. The battle is boiling, and the man is already walking along unknown roads. Some say all warriors go to heaven, others say they are damned. Losing friends, Ethan believed that there they would be met with covered grass and silence. From his first days in Chechnya, and still today, silence was what he wanted most. His legs were ragged from knee to fingertips, an automatic rifle clutched carelessly in his hand. He was a sniper, and in his mind one thought pleading, the silence of silence. The sea is silence. When Ethan got home, he thought nothing would help. His whole body ached in pills, but a handful gave no respite from the pain. Friends were sending mummies. They called her to all parts of the country. Some to Altai, some to the Caucasus. You'll rest here. And then he hugged Delphin, just like Adriana, just like Sam did today. And he smiled at him from his childhood. Ethan cried. Then he learned that he wasn't the only one with tears flowing. Many of the people the dolphins began to heal could not hold back their sobs. And Adriana came as exhausted as he had ever been. She should just be taken by the hand and carried along as he led his boys out from under fire. Now it's her and that boy's turn. What's up, brother? You can't scare big fish like that. I guess they don't bite. Sam said diplomatically. I've read about them. Can I pet them? The water's warm, so take your clothes off, kid. They'll even take you for a ride. What are you doing? Adriana gasped. He'll catch a cold. He'll never catch a cold or drown. I'm watching him. Sam was so intoxicated, he couldn't remember himself, and he squealed with delight. The little baby vest was firmly encrypted on him, and his new friend stayed close to him in the water. And most importantly, the dolphin's elastic vibrations of the water from his big body. And you could throw your arm around and hug this fabulous creature and glide along with him on the water surface. Adriana sat on the edge of the pool, dipping her hand into the water to check that it was really warm, then wiping away the tears that rolled uncontrollably down her cheeks. On the weekend, Ethan had invited her to swim to the rocks. Where was she dumbfounded? What a mother. You've lived by the sea for so long without ever seeing it. I'll give you a tour. Adriana couldn't even imagine what her mother would say. Her daughter had decided to act like a girl again. And Adriana lied for the first time in her life. She lied. She said that this Sunday they made it a working day to rearrange the books. In the morning, the sea is clear as a tear, rested. Well? Asked Ethan. He sat at the water's edge and watched Adriana walk towards him in a golden sundress. He couldn't believe it was her, that she was here. He brought everything he needed, stretched us a towel. Lying there were 2 pairs of swallows. The red ones bigger, the green ones smaller. Tube masks swam. She asked. It was a wild beach here, large rocks with sharp edges. Ethan took Adriana's hand above the elbow. He wouldn't let her fall, and it was definitely worth it for her to slip on the long, silt-covered seaweed. As Ethan's strong fingers and instant reaction brought her back to her balance, the water seemed cold, and Adriana hesitated for a second there. She asked, pointing to a distant rock, "And if I'm not overpowered, I haven't swam in 100 years. Yes, you will swim," he said calmly. "You'll surprise yourself. Just don't panic. Give it to the water. The sea will carry you." Adriana put on the mask. The rubber eased tightly over her face. The tube stretched her lips unaccustomedly, but Ethan stood by her side. Adriana lowered herself onto the water, and it was as if she had been transported beyond an unknown frontier. Into another world, he was as real as the earthly one. But until a moment ago, it had not existed for her, and now she was part of it. And only in the audible strain of her breath sounded her amazement. Adriana poked her outstretched fingers into the rock. feeling the prickly shells and fluffy strands of seaweed beneath her hands. Ethan gestured for her to sit down. She sat down. Suddenly, her head was above water. Again, the crossing of the unknown boundary seemed overwhelming and the air cold. God, how far away the shore was. They sat in the middle of the sea, hair wet, wind lapping. She turned to Ethan even now, after the sea font with salt-shot hair. He seemed to her quite a boy, and she was the same washing by the sea with spontaneous strands of hair. It was as if that school time had returned. Ethan laughed. "What's up? The sharks didn't eat you. You must have made arrangements with them in advance." "You grumbled," she said. "I remember your talents. The sharks wouldn't have touched you," Adriana said, wiping her wet eyes. They sat on a rock in the middle of the sea and reminisced. It was almost completely calm, and only occasionally Adriana started in a succession of small waves at them, one a little higher than the others, and was rising to keep her head from rolling off. They remembered an old man nicknamed Terminator, owner of such a powerful bust that she could demolish everything in her path. "I've never seen women like that in my life," Ethan said, and they memorialized the school bully Charles in 3rd grade by breaking his leg. His teacher came to visit him, and while she was having tea with her mother, Charles managed to bury her glasses in a flower pot. Poor nearsighted Jenna. How did she get home? And the glasses stayed safely in the pot until spring, when her mother decided to replant the geraniums. They went back in their thoughts to exams and prom night, and they were kids again. Ethan suddenly said, "Adriana, nightmare. My eye slipped. I think I'm without one." "Calm down, only calm down," replied Ethan, immortal phrase, bent down, looking into the water, and Adriana saw the deep scars and the ugliness in his back. Ethan dove in. A few seconds later, Adriana felt him put a loss on her leg. "What if he had drowned?" she asked. "Or the flippers?" he asked. "Don't drift." 2. "I could get you to shore sometime. You're only a short swim away." Wow, Adriana thought. The shore was drawing a thin line somewhere on the horizon. But Ethan had his own notions of easy and hard. He took his time climbing up the rock, just held his hand on the edge of it, and it appeared to be at his feet. "Adriana, you're not going anywhere else, are you?" Suddenly he asked. It was night, and the wind was whipping Adriana's glass, clusters of lilac blossoms. And from those flowers, Ethan knocked. Adriana opened up. Adriana knew it was only a step and a lift of the hook on the door. One move, and there would be Ethan, and her future with him, because he wouldn't let her go anywhere. She even felt like Michael would want to hand her over to Ethan, to be safe for her there. She stood and did not look toward the window. The puffy handkerchief had a warmth coming from it. She hugged herself like a little girl. "Tonight my star will be just above the place where I fell a year ago. I'm going home. You see, it's very far away. My body is too heavy. I can't carry it." She felt a breath against her cheek and the nudge of a finger against her back. Michael, his presence was so palpable that she was afraid to turn her head. He pushed her toward Ethan, and now she was already throwing back on the hook. Michael lived as if barely touching the ground, like his mother's point shoes, all directed toward the sky. And he and Ethan are earthly wanderers, carpenters, not yielding to the maiden and love life. If one gets tired, the other will not let fall, will support, and they will go on until their last sunset. And when she opened the door to him, he said, "Stretch out your hand," and placed a small black stone in her palm. "What is it?" she asked in surprise. "It's my father's," he explained. "All I have left of my father is an old guitar. A year later, I accidentally dropped it. It cracked, and inside was duct taped this note to me. And this pebble here. A meteorite. My father wasn't always an alcoholic. He wanted me to know. He used to believe and dream, and hold stars in the palm of his hand. This is the most precious thing I have. I give it to you because you are my star." And Adriana nestled silently against his chest.